And we are live. So tonight I'm super excited because one of the things that doesn't get talked about, but I think certainly um, is is curious on its own merits, especially during the interwar period, was what was going on with Romania and England. You have Mosley, and in Germany you have Hitler, and so you start seeing these different cults of personality and these various strongmen coming. And one of the guys that, and maybe it's because seemingly he was more righteous in his efforts, that you don't see this fellow mentioned too often is, and I'm totally going to mispronounce it, but Corneliu Cordreanu. And he's over in Romania and he makes this group called the Iron Guard. And the Iron Guard, usually, if it's mentioned at all, gets totally dismissed and put in with the Nazis, with any other fascists. And there's no examination of who Cordreanu was, of what he was focusing on within Romania, and how his movement was unique from these other ones, which have already been mentioned. So, in line with that, I have a guest tonight, Mr. Alexandru, and he's going to talk to us about what Romania was going through at that point, who the different classes were, who the different players were, and ultimately what the monarchy was trying to achieve during the interwar, what they were going through. So, Alexandru, good evening. How are you?
Hey, good evening, man. What's up? Thanks for having me on. I've
Absolutely.
been looking forward to us making it happen for forever now. Like I feel like we've been playing email tag and I've been failing completely.
No, this is perfect. You are a guest that I was excited to ultimately get there. I was gonna keep making the stream available because I have just the barest amount of knowledge on the Iron Guard. Excuse me, on the Iron Guard, Cordreanu, on his distinction from the various other groups during that period. So, where do we want to start? Do we want to start with the Iron Guard? Do we want to start with Romania? What was happening at the turn of the century, post World War One? Do we want to talk about communism's growth in Romania? The table is basically yours, so
All
you set
right.
the map for us, however you want to go.
So I've been thinking a lot about it. So I'm not a historian. My specialty is literature and art. Uh, I think what qualifies me for this is like I guess I'm on the right and I'm a Romanian, and it's a part of history I enjoy. On my podcast on the Black Ibis Social Club, we actually have a rule that I'm breaking today, which is no conversation between about anything between 1935 and 1945. Right, and it's kind of a rule, and the rule is because I'm tired of World War II. I'm tired of I'm tired of Nazis and the whole conversation about it. I just don't want to hear anymore. But I
It's
do enjoy.
easy for people to get lost in there.
Right, and so we kind of had that rule, but we made that rule because our initial focus was on the Spanish Civil War, one of our initial early episodes, and I love history that's off to the side. And I've always loved that. Like yeah, the big stuff is great, like the Battle of Midway and Bulge and Stalingrad. They're all fantastic, but I find the shady stuff, the assassinations and the SAS guys and the plots and the double, the betrayals and stuff. I much prefer like the Spanish Civil War over anything else during World War II, right? And obviously, I'm interested in what is going on in Romania because I'm Romanian. I was born there. I was born in Bucharest, in the capital, and I grew up there. Well, I spent my early life there and moved to the U.S. afterwards. Um, the the Iron Guard, or what its formal name is, the Legion of Archangel Michael, is what it's formally called, was a fascist organization or a Christian fascist organization, right? And what's unique about it, it's out of a lot of the countries in the Eastern Europe and even like which Europe in general had fascist governments during World War II to a certain degree. The Hungarians had them. There was like proto-fascist, fascist governments everywhere, but Romania and the Legion was one of the three self-made like fascist governments, right? And that being the other two being, the Italians and the Germans. and it's very uniquely different from the you know, from the German one and the Italian one, and it has like a really weird, like a not weird, but it has like a really interesting like Christian kind of angle to it. It was very Christian focused. It was as
Right.
opposed to more Nazi, like the Nazis and the Italians had weird fascinations with like Buddhism and Hindu stuff. A lot of them, were into all kinds of like they're Orientalist in their nature. I mean, that's where the swastika comes from in a way, right? And they were into a lot of like occultism and some of their elements, which you never had that in the Romanian fascist, the Iron Guard. They were strictly uh, Christian nationalist, right? Probably the one of the world's best examples of Christian nationalist in to ever achieve anything in the 20th century. Um, so they were
Why do
interesting.
you why do you think that is? Why is it that in Germany there it was sort of this, whether it was or wasn't, it was purportedly a reclamation of German spirit, of German identity. Why in Romania was it not a reclamation of its pagan identity, but it was, no, we are Christian and this is how we are
Well,
acting in that.
Well, I think, and I'm speculating, right? I'm speculating from my historical knowledge is that um, the Germans are a post Reformation country, right? As in, they were, half of them were Lutherans, and there were some of them were Catholics, right? So
Yeah.
they were already split along the lines of a post-Reformation lines long before Nazism ever came around. So to unify the German people, you couldn't use religion as a unifying element because you'd have the Roman Catholic, Lutheran, Protestant split, right? And so I think that the Reformation is part of German culture, specifically in Western Germany, compared to I believe
Okay.
most, right. I mean, that's a speculation, I think, right.
It
um
sounds, it's a good one. Sounds good to
Right.
me.
While the Romanians at that time were 9%. I mean, I think right now Romanians are like 90%, Eastern Orthodox. They're probably 99.5% Eastern Orthodox back then, with a smattering of some Lutherans and a few like Roman Catholics here and there. I mean, Germans now they're just Muslims, right? So like it doesn't, they can unify them anyways, right? Um,
Right.
but I mean, the Nazis liked Muslims, right? They were all about it taught, Hitler loved Muslims and stuff, so they whatever, right? Um, so right, so I think that was one of the main kind of unifying issues, where that country's was the people, right? The nation, and the nation as a people was strictly Orthodox for a long time, and it was easy to orient themselves. And you have to also understand that there was already a virulent anti-Semitic trend in Eastern Europe that long predated like the Nazi thing, right? It's like these guys didn't just have these ideas. Oh, we hate Jews, like today. No, it's been forever in those areas. It's like built into them, right? They've been doing it since the Middle Ages. So they had a unifying system of a religion that was kind of homogenous, a homogenous people mixed with a lot of the Jews that came into like Romania, for example, during that time were actually from Russia, and they were from further east, and they often they felt like they were invaders, at least from the Romanian perspective, the peasant perspective, right? Because they were urbanites and stuff, and they felt like they were being invaded by these urbanites. So that unified Christian like nationalism mixed with anti-Semitism, it was just the ripe ground for it to develop, and that's what's interesting. So the reason you started off by asking why don't we know about it, right? Why isn't it a topic, right? One,
Yeah.
I think that, well, one, Romania is a small country compared to it, in the histography of the world, it's a pretty small country. Um, but I think one of the main reasons is because of the post-Soviet, well, the post-World War II kind of historical narrative, right? And in in the and this is why we don't know. And are you familiar with the Nazis in Hungary, the fascists in Hungary? No, right?
Uh,
Probably not.
well,
Vaguely, right?
right.
I'm being
It's,
hyperbolic, or
yeah.
hyperbole, right?
Oh,
So
okay. Okay.
right,
Now I understand.
you
It's
don't know a lot about him. Why?
right.
And the reason is because after World War II, the pro-Soviet governments of all these Eastern European countries needed to whitewash their fascist support, right? So they rewrote their historiography, right? Um, by making it seem that like the German Nazis invaded Romania and Hungary and blah blah blah, and there was always a resistance. There was always a resistance, right? I mean, you have that fantasy about the French, right? That we constantly hear about the French resistance, right? But remember, the Germans didn't fight their way to Paris; they just walked into Paris, right? You don't walk
Mhm.
into Paris without a majority of Parisians being okay with you being there. You see what I mean, right? But
Yeah.
of course, after World War II, every Frenchman was a resistance fighter. Bullshit, right? They're all every French broad was banging every Nazi SS officer left and right, and every French dude was hanging out with the boys, right? Because it was every day no different than the day before, right? There was a
Right.
resistance, but highly overplayed, from the French perspective, right? Well, you had the same kind of historiography, rewritten history, which was no, we weren't ever a fascist country. We were just invaded by the evil Nazis, and then when we were the vanguard for the Soviet army when they first came through, and so there's that kind of idea written.
Well, once the game is over, it's much easier to pick sides.
Hmm. That's exactly it. Now, what's critical to understand is that the world of 1920s 1930s is a completely different world than the world we live in today, right? People go, well, why did you become fascist? Well, because you had no other choice. You had two choices, basically. A country, if as you're listening to right now, open up Google and type in map of Eastern Europe. Look where Romania is, right? You have a country that's probably the size of your average American state, in Arizona or something like that, right? And right north of it, northeast of it, is what? Fucking Soviet Union, right? It's Ukraine now, but it used to be the Soviet Union. And you have a radical, exceptionally violent country that just took over, and ended in World War One, right? To the northwest, you have Hungary, which hates Romanians and wants part of Transylvania, right? To the southwest, you have more Slavs in that were communist Yugoslavia at that time, right, with Tito and everything, right? And then you had Bulgarians that are also Slavs, and to the southeast, across the Black Sea, you have Muslims, right? That have been our like natural enemies forever. So it's a country that's stuck at the crossroads of just bullshit, basically, right? So the story of Eastern Europe really being involved in World War II, or the whole fascism, communism thing, it really starts with and it really starts in during World War One, to be honest, right? And well, it actually starts before that, right? It starts when Romania became an independent nation or its own kingdom, which was in the around the time of the American Civil War. And it used to be three different principalities. They got united under one country. That's why the flag has the three colors, right? It's Moldova, Transylvania, and I'm mind blanking, right? But once those countries got united under Alexandru Ioncuza, he was the voivode, the king, for a little bit. He got deposed, and guess who came in? Right, the kings of Romania were Austro-Hungarians, right? They're Hohenzollern or whatever the hell, right? They were actually related to the British monarchs, right? The King Carol II of Romania during the 30s was the cousin of King Charles of England, right? Like not the current one, but the dad of the last of the queen, right? So um, the same Germanic royalty was in charge of Romania, part of the Austro-Hungary Empire, right? But and here's a very key element thing, right? If you're familiar with Romania, our language is a Latin language, right? So we speak Romanian is a Latin language, and historically, we are Dacians, right? Which is the ancient, like, kind of pagans that lived in the area who got taken over by the Roman Empire in the Trajan Wars, right? So the
I
big
think is it a romantic language? Because I think that one caught me off guard one day.
yes, it's a Romance language, right?
Yeah.
It's actually one of, like, there's some arguments about this, but like if you look at the linguistic kind of element, it's one of the languages that's closest to what the Roman Latin would have been, because it got
Mhm.
separated from the West, so it kind of stayed very similar to
Okay. Yeah.
right. So, we're a combination of these pagan Dacians, Sarmatians, so, basically from that got conquered in the two Trajan wars, right? And Trajan's column in Roman stuff is about the conquering of Dacia, which is Romania. And when those people combined, the Romans stayed, and that's what we consider ourselves, right? So we're, pagans mixed with Romans, and then Christianity came after the Romans in the very early on, right? So what's and then obviously part of the Byzantine Empire eventually became part of the Ottoman Empire because they conquered most of this area. So kind of a confusing thing, but they found themselves being a Romance language speaking country kind of at the crossroads between Western Europe and Eastern Europe, right? And like even like Russia itself or Western Russia, there's always a hard time. Which way do we go? And Romanians have always been, historically, at least in the intellectual side, they've been francophones. And if you're familiar, or like francophiles is a better word, they're francophiles, right? If you look at the history of 19th century Russia, specifically like Peter the Great, they're very similar story. The Russians during the Peter the Great era were all Francophiles. If you're familiar with War and Peace, right? The whole idea of War and Peace is all these like very snooty intellectuals that love the French ended up realizing that their peasants were better than the French because the French were Napoleon who invaded them. Right. That's kind of like I'm paraphrasing, War and Peace, but that was kind of an idea behind it, right? The Romanians had the same kind of issue where they considered themselves little France, especially in the 19th century, early 20th century. And they considered Bucharest like little Paris. They still do. It's still like if you look at 19th century Bucharest, it's very Paris inspired. They had a lot of the street lights in the early 20th century are all very Parisian vibe. The cafes, the culture, their clothes, it was all like they were just Paris LARPing. And a lot of architects came from France, and a lot of streets were named after French things. So there was this huge obsession with French, right? But and also because we shared a linguistic base. So everybody that studied anything would go to France to study in that era. And then this is 19th century, early 20th. Now World War One breaks out.
Yeah.
So you have people that consider themselves, like cousins or brothers with the French, but they have an Austro-Hungarian king, right?
Yeah, well, so let me pull that map back up too, because it's funny as you're, and I wish I'd found a map that had all of Europe in it, but it's interesting to me because it's almost as if you have Romania, and then you have to go through this the unwashed masses of the Slavs and then the Germanics to make your way to France and to a more enlightened people.
Right. So if you want to pull up a map of something called Greater Romania, this is an interesting topic to look at real fast because it'll
Okay,
explain some of the thought processes behind what happened next.
yeah, let's see if I can find something.
It should be called Greater Romania, and it's a kind of an interwar idea.
Okay,
So Americans, if you're Americans, people consider Americans racist, or Americans don't understand racism. You've never met racism until you spend some time in Eastern Europe, when like
okay,
blonde, blue-eyed people hate each other because they're like born from like across like a 5 millimeter border. Okay, like and you know you're going to have a bunch of Hungarians come here and tell me what a subhuman I am, and vice versa. I'll tell you a quick story. Like, all right, so this is this map, right? This is Greater Romania, right? And see, it adds all this extra stuff, right? That doesn't really exist today, right? Like this map here on the left, you can see it with the different stuff, right? So a lot of these borders, um, a lot of Transylvania, for example, has a huge Hungarian population, and vice versa. Because during the Middle Ages and forever, the idea of the nation state didn't exist, right? They were just
right.
kingdoms that traded back and forth, right? And
Borders are fluid, and you'll find different people groups.
correct, right? But in all this greater Romania era, there's Romanians, right? And a lot of these places are majority Romanians, right? Well, during World War One, when that kind of broke out, the Romanians were kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place, right? They wanted to create this, but they didn't know who to side with because basically the Hungarians at that time were part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and if we sided with them, if the Romanians, I'm not saying we because I wasn't there. If the Romanians sided with them, the Hungarians would have wanted that big chunk of Transylvania, right? And if we sided with the Russian side, the Allied side, those guys would have wanted a big chunk of that Bessarabia, Moldova, right? Bessarabia is now part of Ukraine, so they actually have it now, right? You know what I
Hmm.
mean, right? And then Moldova is its own country now because it was annexed by the Soviet Union after World War II, right? As a buffer state
Yeah.
between us and Europe, right? So there's all these like, are we going to lose our and this is a country that only became its own united nation less than 60 years prior, right, in the 19th century.
Yep.
So they're like, which side do we take? They ended up siding with the allies, right, with the really the American side. But the idea of Americans being in World War One is a joke if you really like read history, right? Like you were there for like 4 months and like, yeah, we were there, um
Right. Right.
but like the British side, right, the Anglo French French side. And it was kind of a gamble, and they were paranoid because, well, shit, in the middle of World War One, the Russians went all Soviet and they had the Russian Revolution. And now they're panicking, like, are we going to lose this giant chunk of country to these like
Yeah.
insane murderous Soviets, right? So they sided with the side that won, and they got Greater Romania. So during the interwar period, this is what Romania looked like, right? It was this big country, right? But this really made the Hungarians mad. It made the Russians mad. So coming into World War II, you had all these people hating on Romania, right? The Russians wanted all this junk, right? And the Hungarians wanted this junk, right? So they had to play a game of whose side are we going to agree with, right? Romania had one thing that the Hungarians don't have, right? Which is oil. There's a crap ton of oil and natural gas in the country. And it was Hitler's only supply of oil, right?
Okay.
So Hitler knew it was kind of like their trump card, right? Hitler knew that he could not do Operation Barbarossa without the Romanian oil fields, right?
Hmm.
So that's what kind of like won Romania like favor in that side, right? So they were
Right.
constantly playing both sides, like who's going to win, or And if you like look at the history from like the 20s all the way into the 40s when the war fully started, there was assassinations done by like SAS agents in the country, even Americans bombed Romania during World War II. There was fighting in Romania. One of my favorite fighter pilot aces, his name was Cantacuzino, who was actually a prince, right? He ended up dying in Spain much later. If you read about this guy, his life is fantastic. He's one of the only fighter pilots that had an ace kill on a Russian plane, a Nazi plane, and an American plane, right? He basically,
That's amazing.
because he flew against the Russians while they were on the Axis side, and then
Yes.
he flew against the Russians and Americans, and then he flew against the Germans when they switched sides at the end of the war. He defended Bucharest from the Luftwaffe when they retaliated
Yep.
against the betrayal of Romania, right? So he shot down one of each kind from both sides of it. So there's interesting stuff, but when you understand the politics, it's not this black and white simplicity where it's like, well, they had to play it smart, right? So
Yes.
where does the Iron Guard come in? Well, they're a you know they're you're in a world where your choices are some sort of right-wing politics or communism. That's really it, right? There is no democracy, right? Like no countries in Europe, very few countries in Europe were democratic at this time, right?
Because just to take a quick to the side here, the reason you can make that distinction so clearly is because, as you've already mentioned, all of a sudden in the past 50 years, we now have nation states, we have borders, and we're saying this is our group of people. So how do we care for it? So that's one part of it, and then it does get into whether there were little fiefdoms and it's a collection of people like Deutschland, Germany, or whether it is ancestral lands like the UK. Uh, you have the nation state issue that you're dealing with. And then on top of that, at this point, during the interwar period, we've already seen the Bolshevik uprising. We've seen, I don't, I'm throwing Darwinism in there simply because it was a semi radical position as it's spread out from academia. And so you see Darwinism pop up, and all of a sudden, as that's getting seen, evaluated, and participated in with the lower groups, that's coming down from academia. And then you're also seeing communism, which has this spread both coming down from academia as well as going up through the participation and the involvement of the lower classes. And so all of a sudden, everything, and we could go back to French Revolution, blah, and then we're really getting way off the block. But you're seeing just this massive upheaval of personal identity, national identity, religious identity within all the countries of continental Europe,
Right.
as well as the UK.
Right. And
And
this was a mess. This was a mess from any time. If you look back
right,
in history.
something was going to happen, something had to happen,
Right.
and sides had to be chosen in the midst of this.
Right. It was an insane time, right? And it was an insane time. So let's kind of like hop onto the topic, which is the Iron Guard, Archangel Michael, and Cordreanu, right? So who are these guys? So Romania in the interwar period, and Romania came out on top at the end of World War One. Okay, it came in on top because it got all these land. It kind of gambled between I forgot the Intot, or what are the sites called? In it's late over here in my brain.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah, I know the Entente and the
Entente. Yeah. So
yeah.
they picked the right side. They picked the right side,
Uh-huh.
and they won. And
Yeah.
they won a bunch of, and then they didn't really have to like do anything about the Russians because the Russians imploded, right? During their,
Right.
so, but they were paranoid about the Russians. They're right there. Look, Russia's right there, guys. Right? They're paranoid
Yes.
about the Russians today. There's a reason why Romania is in NATO, and there's a reason why they're putting American bases in there, because the Russians are right there, guys. Right?
Yes.
Um, and Ukraine is where, it's in Moldova basically, right? And so it's a very terse time, right? Now the country itself is very agrarian, right? It's coming from the 19th century. It's still a very, very I think 90% of exports were grain. And the 20s come around, and there's a massive, like, you know with the global recession, right? And a country, that was slowly industrializing, it it is a country that became very intellectual, at least in its academic kind of side. Lots of peasants, former peasants, went to the cities to become college educated, and it had like the highest percentage of like lawyers. It had, there's more lawyers in Bucharest than in Paris around that time, right? But they weren't working as lawyers because there's no jobs for them. There was a basically, what's the term that we use a lot on like Substack and stuff? A overproduction of the managerial elite, right?
Sure.
So
Yep.
you had this glut of, the sons of peasants, right? Like Cordreanu himself, right? Who went to college, started becoming educated, but there was no jobs. There was nothing there for them, right? Why? Because certain cities were overfilled with richer Jews that ran away from the Soviets, right? So you had cities like Yash that were 30% Jewish, that used to not be 30% Jewish, right? And due to the migrations of the early 20th century, and these guys were like ripe for being blamed in a way, right? For like being attacked. And so you had this glut of like hyper intellectual people. Now, one of the reasons why you might not, hear this much about Iron Guard is because a lot of our really favorite philosophical people tended to be in the Iron Guard or supporters of the Iron Guard. Like, for example, everybody's favorite, philosopher of religion, Mircea Eliade, who was the head of religion studies at the University of Chicago until the day he died, right? He was a propagandist for the Iron Guard, and he went to college in Bucharest, and he studied under some of the philosophers that formed the Iron Guard. Uh, I don't know if you're familiar with Emil Cioran, right?
No.
He's like the super doomer guy. You see like memes of him. He wrote like the world is miserable. A lot of these like very fatalistic kind of like doom philosophies, True Detective type quotes, right? That True Detective kind of used. Well, guess what? He was also an Iron Guard dude. You know what I mean?
No kidding.
But he
Okay.
was basically in Paris after all this stuff happened, or at University of Chicago, or that kind of stuff, right? And Elie Wiesel, the Jewish guy that wrote Night, he eulogized Mircea Eliade at his funeral in Chicago. Of course, not Elie Wiesel, sorry, Sam, the famous Jewish author from the 80s. I forgot what his name is, right? So it's interesting because you have these guys that were like straight up fascists, but they kind of got absorbed into like American and Western culture because of their intellectual creations, right? So one interesting thing, and I told you this before we started, that you can find is you had these cities ripe with kind of a fervent intellectualism, like a and it's very different than what you had like in a lot of other movements, which like for example the Nazi kind of German movement was former military guys, right? The Hitler, the brown shirts and stuff were all ex-military, ex-World War I guys that were like salty about losing World War I, and that led to brown shirts and that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
These guys though, they weren't most of them weren't soldiers, right? They were actually intellectuals. They were students. It was a student movement, which is really interesting, right? Because if you look at the right in America, I've said this before, it's an anti-student movement, right? The right in America has a extreme anti-intellectualism. It started to kind of take on an intellectual kind of aesthetic quality with guys like BAP, right? I mean, you're familiar with BAP,
Yes.
like Bronze Age Pervert, right?
Yeah.
So where's Bronze Age
What?
Pervert from?
And that is he Romania?
Oh, he's Romanian. He was born in the same hospital I was because he posted his birth
Okay.
certificate. He's like a year older than me, born in Bucharest, right? So
Okay.
so it's interesting that a lot of these Eastern European dudes like BAP and
Yeah.
stuff are highly intellectual dudes, and they're also on the right wing. Right? So one very interesting thing about Romania is that its artistic intellectualism has always been right wing, right? Uh,
Okay.
Mihai Eminescu, which is the author, you can look him up and you'll see pictures of him, right? He's considered like the Shakespeare of the Romanian language. He's a poet, right? He was, and he's on money today. If you look at Romanian money, he's on the money today. I mean, he was basically idolized and worshipped during all of communism, right? But he was a fanatical right winger, a fanatical nationalist, and a fanatical anti Semite, right? And the communists had to just kind of accept him as that, even though, because he was just great, right? And so he was on the money during communism, even though he was, you know, just an insane right winger that would have despised them, right? But he was a national poet for the entire, until what he is today, right? So, and a lot of the historians that came after him were also fanatically on the right wing. So there was never this element of left wing art in that country or left wing ism as a trend. The aesthetic kind of like ideal was always right wing in that era. So when the students went to college, they became more right wing in a way. Does it make sense? Kind of, which is such a weird, unique thing from the American right wing kind of system, right? Where we are very anti universities because the universities are somewhere where the left lives, right?
Right. And that is one of the things that you get rumblings of on the internet, but there is this idea that populism in and of
Right.
itself has never accomplished anything. But it's oh, doggone it, who am I thinking of? Scott Scottish Presbyterian. He did not die Presbyterian. Oh, doggone it. Like I'm thinking of all the names that aren't him. I'm thinking Yaki. I'm thinking Schmidt. I'm thinking, uh,
Uh,
oh. Anyways, but there is that idea that seemingly is a relatively new idea. I know Pat Buchanan kind of mentioned this, but if you go and look at the right wing in the U.S., yeah, it's not Buchanan's not even thought of or mentioned with most people. What it tends to be is people out on the lake or the river in their boat flying a flag that says "fuck Joe in the hoe,"
right, right. Very
and that
crass, very, very
yes,
like almost cringy, to use a Gen
uh
Z
huh,
word. It's like
and
I don't want.
it expresses the frustration, but there is seemingly no further thought than the frustration. There's nothing that goes on to say, and we want to do this within the halls of power, and we want to accomplish this. And so there are people who are now making that argument, but yeah, the overwhelming majority, I think you're right, is it's a very uh, I
It's
hesitate to say
vulgar.
low class, but
No, but it is. It is. It's
yeah,
vulgar, right? It's vulgar, and
yeah,
I know there's this element of like, yeah, America, fuck yeah, titties, and it's like
right,
that's great, but that doesn't put money on the table, that doesn't
yes,
give your kids jobs. That doesn't, and that's why I always say, like, people go like, well, I was always a conservative. Well, while you were a conservative buying yourself a raised truck, your daughter was out there sleeping with everybody. You know what I mean? Because you were too
yeah,
busy being a raised truck conservative at the lake with your sea-doo, and
yes,
that's the problem, right? It's a vulgar conservatism where, like, you replace actual political action and involvement with, oh yeah, cool, the jet planes flew real low to the beach, America, like that
right,
really is going to change things. Like, almost every display we have of right-wing politics lately has been just like a vulgar stupidity, which is like almost like, it makes me like, we go, I don't want to be fucking part of this because it's embarrassing, right? Like
right,
like in a way, like, at least the guys in New York, like Mondami and stuff, they're talking about rent.
yeah,
You know, I might not agree with them, but they're talking about rent. You know what I mean? Like, he's trying to do something about the rent. It might be completely wrong, it might be insane communism, but at least he's talking about it. Where's our guys talking about rent or affording houses or anything like that? We don't get that. So, but what we get is
yeah,
like Bud Light and jet planes flying low to the beach. And
right.
reflecting pools or whatever, and it's vulgar stupidity in a way, right? So,
Well,
like,
it is. It's interesting. Even listening to you talk right now, it's like where are the right wing guys that are talking about medical access?
right,
Where are the right wing guys that are talking about actual life issues, student debt, and so on? Because frankly, let's just play this game out a little bit. It's like, just throw a solution out there. I'm My solution on college is college should be absolutely free, and 1/1000th of the people that are attending right now should actually be in college. These
right,
people need to be selected, and that needs to be a finishing ground for the best of the people in the U.S. And so at least there's a solution. And so, no, I think your point is well taken. It's well made. There is this. It runs on vibes
right,
here in the
right.
states. I
Well,
think that's
recently I went to an emergency room, right? And
yeah,
the guys that listen to my podcast have heard me rant about this, right? But I went to emergency room in the middle of the night because my throat was closing up because I had surgery, right? And I called my surgeon. I'm like, hey man, I can't even talk, right? My wife had to talk to the surgeon, and he's like, go to urgent care and get a steroid shot. And it was like 1 a.m. I went to this local, middle of South Carolina, like, and the doctor probably, and the doctor probably spent like 30 seconds with me, okay, and gave me a shot. That's it.
yeah,
He didn't even take my, like, vital signs. And like, I'm a healthcare provider myself, so I know exactly what the expectation is, right? Well, the front desk lady messed up my insurance. She didn't take my insurance properly, right? So I get a bill like a week later, right, for my 30 seconds and a shot of prednisone, which probably costs like $1.50 per by the vial, right? They charged me $5,000, right? Which is, I had it,
absurd.
which is absurd. It made me want to, like, grab a hammer and sickle and dig up the
Yes,
Karl Marx and Lenin and Stalin and just execute these people. You know what I mean? Because I
right.
thought, like, okay, and like, here I am. This is a mistake, right? I have insurance. It's going to be covered, right? Which, by the way, what a pain in the ass getting it covered was, because those people don't actually, like, wait for you to pay them. They just send it to the collections before they even, like, send you the bill, right? So you have to, like, tell some Indian in, like, Mumbai that you do have insurance, and he's like, but I don't know how to fix, and they keep on sending you collection bills. It's a fucking disaster, right? Um, either way, it makes me want to cheer for that dude, like Luigi, that shot that motherfucker. You know what I mean, right? Because I get it. I get it. Can you imagine if I didn't have insurance? If a regular American family who makes under like 60 grand a year got a $5,000 fucking bill for a $1.50 vial of prednisone, not even a whole vial, just the small one dose out of a multi-dose
Right.
vial, right? Like, where's the Republicans talking about this, guys? You know what I
Yes.
mean, right?
Yep.
Where are we talking about this, right? Like that's your grandmas and stuff. That's what they have to deal with, right? Complete and total criminal ripoff of people, you know?
Well, and that's a big part. That's a big part of, yes, the German Nazi side was vulgar in some ways like the Americans, and they were also focused on how do we take care of our veterans and how do we move into this post um, post Weimar that we want to see.
Right.
And then the same way you go to the Iron Guard and Cordreanu, and it's this idea of there are actual problems in Romania,
And we're gonna
and
fix them.
we see what's that
We're gonna fix them. We're gonna
exactly.
offer solutions, and that's
Yes,
you get a lot of these wing nats and guys are into like right wing guys are into like Nazism and fascist and blah blah. I'm a
power
fascist,
fantasies.
complete and total dorks, right? And they always take the wrong lessons from these guys, right? They always want
Yes,
to LARP as the occultist, esoteric, edgy Nazis and stuff. It's like no, you should if you're gonna LARP as the guys that like provide food for their neighborhoods and that kind of stuff, because you know what.
help the old lady across the street.
Right, right. Like take those lessons, like figure out why they did get elected in the first place, and figure that out. Because you know what, your enemies, dude, they know how to do that. Like, and you see them getting elected over and over and over in places like New York. Why? Because they're
Yes,
talking about the $5,000 bills that your grandma gets. They're talking about the rent in where it's like ludicrous and that kind of stuff. Right? They're evil and corrupt, but at least they're talking about the things that people need to talk about instead of talking about reflecting pools and jets overflying stuff, and at MMA
yeah,
fights and dumb shit like that, right? Um,
yes, yep,
right, and it's and what I mean is like it's cool to have this stuff, right? Not that those guys were great either, right? But it's all like stupid. But to go back to Cordreanu, so he's this dude. He's a young guy. Young guy in the 20s. He's the son of, interestingly enough, not a real Romanian, right? So
okay,
okay,
okay.
um, you know,
He was an Austrian, was he?
his mom was probably Austro-Hungarian, I think, right?
Okay,
And his dad was probably a Ukrainian, right? But he
okay,
kind of they became hyper Romanians during this
yes,
post World War One acquisition, right?
yeah,
So, and he's from the Moldova, from the northeast area, which is like right now it's technically not even in Romania anymore by borders. It's in Moldova, right? And he he's an intelligent guy. His dad was an intelligent guy also, was really big into this historian named Kuza, who was a fervent anti-Semite, right? And he was really into like this, like he was into blending like he was into like a lot of the occult stuff, like the pagan stuff, mixing a lot of this paganism stuff. And they were really big into the idea that the Dachins, so in the early history of Romania, the Dacian pagans, right? They worship this god named Zalmoxis, right? And the easiest way to describe Zalmoxis, if you're not familiar with him, is he's Krom from Conan, right? He's like a thunder god, right? And he doesn't care about you. And what they used to do, and this is this is known anthropology and archaeology, is they would have a pit with spears in it, and they would throw their firstborn into the pit of spears. And if the dude died real quick, it was a good day, and they were going to win the battle or whatever. But if he died painfully, it was a bad day. So anyways, that's how they told the future for Zalmoxis. But Zalmoxis doesn't care about you. He's a thunder god. But they really, the big kind of like anthropological idea of the 19th century studying the Dachshunds was that they were a monotheist culture, right? So they
yeah,
rolled that into Christianity, right? There's this like kind of like
sure,
proto-historical kind of element of like, well, the Dacian priests became the first Christians, right? And they brought, and it's all like, the whole Aryan mumbo jumbo stuff, right? Argotha type shit, right? That people talk about. It's kind of like that.
yeah,
But they're big into it today. Like if you go, there's brand new statues of Zalmoxis and Decibald, like the Dacian king and stuff, all
yeah,
over like
okay,
Romania, especially in like right wing circles. And
yes,
so he's really big into it, and a big part of it was hating the Jews, right? Because the Jews were foreigners, they're outsiders, and blah blah blah, and they weren't Christians. Um, so Cordano
jump into
basically,
the banks and the financing and
yeah, the whole
yep,
thing, right? So Cordano ends up he gets to go to college, right? So his dad goes to fight in World War One. He can't go. He's too young. Right? He's like, oh, young. So he goes
Yes.
to college in Yash, right? Yash is a city in a kind of like it was like the seat of the kings. It wasn't the capital, but it was considered like the intellectual like base of the country at that time. So he goes up to Yash
Sure.
to study under Akuza at this university. He's pissed off because it's a bunch of Jews everywhere, right? And not only are they Jews, but they're communists. So he's at this university and he decides that he hates it. He hates all these communists, and he really he becomes obsessed with the idea. He unites the idea, which is kind of not a really big thing in the US or in the historiography of communism in the US, but it is now, especially after Sholonisky. He unites the idea of Judaism and communism, right? That's like a big connection that he makes, right? Whether it's real or not, but in his worldview, Jew is a communist. Communism is a synonym for Jew. Okay.
Yes. Yep.
Right. That's a big thing. That's a very critical kind of element to understand about him and the Iron Guard guys. So every element of like atheism and all that stuff, that's just Jews. That he blames it all on Jews, right? That's like his whole thing.
Yep.
And he's really pissed off about this, right? And a big reason why he is because the majority of college students in college were the sons of peasants, and it was very expensive for them to go to college out there because the crops sucked, and we're in a global depression, right?
Mm-hmm.
The Jews, the children of the Jews going to universities at that time, lived in the cities. So they often just lived at home while going to university. So it was very easy to look at them and go, damn, these guys are scamming the system, or they're taking our places or whatever, so there's a lot
Where's
of
the sacrifice?
right.
We know where we came out of.
Right. So you have this like very like communist kind of like, pro-communist kind of element in the university at this time. So he starts basically starting like the Christian youth movement, right? He becomes kind of like a Charlie Kirk kind of, I guess, you know what I mean? Or one of these he starts getting guys together, and they go in the woods and they drill because they're obsessed that the Soviet Union is going to invade any minute now. So they're drilling, in the woods.
Wait, and this is it too strong a point to say that to some degree the Soviet Union was in the mind of Cordreanu and some of the younger Romanians, the Soviet Union, or what would become the Soviet Union, was simultaneous with the Jews and with Jewish power at that
right.
point.
Right, to like almost 100%, right? If you
Yeah.
read like any of his like writing, that's exactly what you had Lenin and Trotsky, and these guys are all Jewish guys, right? Marx, they're the whole thing was a Jewish thing to them, Of course,
Yes.
later on, the Soviet Union purges its Jewish elements completely itself in the Stalin era, but at the time, we're talking about post World War One. The revolution
Yes.
just happened, but the Civil War just began. And if you look at like records and stuff, he was right. The Soviet Union was planning on invading that area of Moldova and stuff, but it got sidelined, right, by the Civil War. Now you have to understand, and this is where like a lot of Americans aren't going to get it. This is an existential battle for these people, right?
Yeah.
Because when the Soviet Union took over, the communists took over like the Ukraine, it deported all the kulaks to fucking Siberia, and they died. Right,
Yes.
they're massacred. Right, entire like races of people were erased by the Soviets. Right, and these people in a country as small as Romania, it was an existential threat to them. Right,
Yeah.
they were convinced that this atheist country that hated them because they were not Slavs. Right, they're heavily Christian, unlike the Soviets who rejected Christianity at that time. Right, and did not support their revolution. They were going to be kulaked in the same way, right? And
Yes.
erased, or in the same way they did to Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan and all those other Soviet countries. Like Americans don't realize what the Soviets did, where they literally moved entire people all over the place, and destroyed entire cultures, right? In the same way, like I guess the only comparable thing that like might make sense to Americans is how we moved the Native Americans from one part of the country to another part and forced them onto reservations. The Soviets did that in the 20th fucking century to entire people in the Soviet Empire, in Soviet Union, So it was existential for these guys. It was, we have no choice. And then on the West, they had the Germans that were talking about giving Transylvania to the Hungarians, right?
Sure.
So you had they were between a rock and a hard place, right? And also, once again, where did communism come from originally? Germany, right? You know, so and this is pre-Hitler. Nobody's even heard of Hitler yet. It doesn't even exist yet,
Right.
right? So
Right.
these guys were obsessed with that. Like, so it's interesting because this like heavy thread of anti-communist anti-Semitism existed before Hitler ever did anything. Right? He was still trying to
Yeah.
become a painter at this time, right? So these dudes are sitting out here trying to figure out, like, hey, we don't want to become communists. We don't want to get exterminated by these guys.
Yes. We see
So
what's going down in Russia.
right, exactly. This is early 20, early like 20s, right? So
Yep.
he goes and they start organizing, they start doing all this stuff. They start like I believe I did not write the name of it down, but it's like a nationalist Christian party. And they start doing like, and I think I told you this before we started, right? Is that if you were to compare them to anybody today, these guys would look they would remind you most of Antifa, right? The college Antifa groups we have today, right? What they
Yeah.
would do is they would disrupt everything. They would do sit-ins. They would block the doors of universities.
Yes.
When like left wing guys would go give speeches, they would like throw stuff or threaten and fight the police and stuff. They would start riots, and they became progressively more and more violent as the 20s went in and the 30s came up, right? And they started there was what really set them off was so at that time. Are you familiar with the King Carol? Okay, so there was no left wing in Romania, to be honest, right? It was just right wingers versus
Mhm.
right wingers for the most part. At that time, Romania was still a kingdom, and the king was Carol II. And Carol II was basically a playboy. He was a philanderer, right?
Mhm.
He was a scandal monger. He was just a kind of a power hungry playboy. Uh, his son Michael basically just recently passed away. He was the last king
Yeah.
of Romania, who was loved by a lot of Romanians, right? But his son basically disowned him and never spoke to this
Okay.
to Carol after the 40s because he
Yeah.
cheated on his mom while she was pregnant with him and stuff. He was just a total, piece of crap. He ended up dying in Portugal in the 60s after going into exile with his mistress. I spent a lot of time in
So
Mexico.
this is completely different, even than the Kaiser. This is different than Tsar Nicholas. This dude is just out there doing his own thing.
Right. Right. So he himself was he didn't care about anti-Semitism whatsoever. He didn't care
Yeah.
about the Soviets. He didn't care about he was basically he just cared about his own power, right?
Yeah.
And he he originally wanted to throw in with he basically up until the start of World War II, World War II, like the actual real start, he played all sides, right? He went to England and he sent delegates to England and to France, and he was basically playing all sides, right?
Yes.
And he 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 had these
Because
like
at this point, the oil reserves of Romania, the Europe is aware of this.
oh yes, yes, right. So
Okay.
The British were paranoid that the Germans were going to get the oil reserves of Romania, right?
Okay.
To,
Yeah.
like the Wehrmacht would not go east without that, right? It's impossible.
Yeah.
There was no way the war could have happened. At least the Eastern Front would never happen without the oil reserves at East, right?
Okay.
Um, so the British knew that to the point where they even tried to sabotage the oil fields at Pitesh and stuff. And they even
Yeah.
would send, like, there was a famous case where a British agent through Turkey, all these things,
Yep.
assassinated an SS officer in Bucharest, like an ambassador, because
Yeah.
their goal was, we do not want Romania on the side of the Axis, because that's basic. It's imagine if like all the oil countries in Saudi Arabia joined, your enemy, right?
Right. Yeah.
Right. So the oil fields in Pitesh basically fueled the Wehrmacht, and it fueled them against the Russians. Now, but we're talking right now, we're in the Ribbentrop Act, right? The Molotov-Ribbentrop
Yeah.
Act. So the Germans and the Russians are allies technically on paper, right? And they're carving up Europe.
Right.
So the Romanian king is playing all sides.
Yes.
One of the things that kind of triggers the Iron Guard, and this is the early, a little bit before this, is that he passes this law which gives Romanian Jews citizenship, right?
Oh dear. Yeah.
And these guys flip out. And these guys are student activists at the point. So I'm kind of backtracking, right? So he flips
Sure.
out.
Yep.
He's like, what the fuck, right? They're not happy about this stuff, right?
Yes.
Around this time, they're agitating and stuff. And Cordreanu gets kicked out of university and they refuse to give him his degree, right? He's like, oh,
Yes.
they never give him his degree, even though he should have, we don't know if it's real or not or whatever, right? So he goes to
Right.
Germany. He goes to Germany and he is really disillusioned by Germany. This is post-war Germany. He sees like all the poverty and all the, the Weimar Germany, right?
Yep.
And he's like, wow, the spirit of Germans is really good, and he's really into them. And some guys, some friends tell him, yeah, there's this guy up in like in the east in Munich or something like that. He's like a ex soldier. He's some painter. He's really cool or whatever. He's starting a thing, right? So he
Yes.
kind of gets inspired by that. He goes, oh, I don't think he ever goes meets him or anything, but he's like, okay. So he comes back and he decides, now I'm going to become more politically active. I'm going to go
Yes.
beyond that, right? So in this time, there's tons of communist agitation in the country. There's, because remember, the communists were right about a lot of things. It sucked to be a fucking peasant, right? It sucked to work in a factory while these guys that are kings and stuff and nobility were living like it's little Paris, Meanwhile, your ass
Yes.
is like scything in a field somewhere or like wrenching in a factory for like your fingers getting chopped off, right? So a lot of communist agitation, a lot of like strikes. So he kind of takes the student association to like fight off these guys. But he realizes, he even says it in a lot of his writing, the workers are not my enemy. It's the Jews that convince the workers to be my right. That's like his big thing. And he goes, because there's a quote, I don't know where it is. He goes, well, what would happen if these worker strikes win out and win the country? Do you think the worker would be in charge? No, it would be the Jew that pushed him to do it, right?
Right.
And the worker would be a slave to somebody else. So that was his view, right? His view was that a lot of this like kind of communist agitation was foreign influenced, right?
Yeah.
And they would just trade one master for another. That was his view, and that was what they started doing. So they started doing what you're talking about. They started doing very religious kind of stuff. Now,
Yep.
they're all factionalized, right? There's not one group. There's multiple groups, right?
Mhm.
And they start running like micro parties, parliamentary parties, and blah blah blah, and they start fighting against each other. And the whole time, if you look at King Carol, he's balancing the Germans. He's got Germans coming in SS officers all over Bucharest. You've got British officers all over Bucharest. You have Soviet officers all over the place, right? And he's playing all sides because he's basically like a turd in the middle of he's on a sailboat made of turds floating in a bowl, right? Any minute now, he
Yeah.
knows it's going to get flushed because the whole Europe is going to explode. This is like 1938, right?
Yeah.
So he's paranoid, right? And he's got these fascist guys, these Iron Guardists guys, like just acting up, accusing him of being pro-Jewish and blah 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 and all
Yep.
this stuff, and they're getting more and more violent. So one thing that they do, and one thing that's very different than a lot of like other right wing kind of elements, is that they start assassinating people. Right. So they decided that they're never going to win democratic elections. They came to that conclusion. So they decided they're just going to kill all the judges.
Mhm.
Right. So that's what they started doing. They started making death squads and death lists, and they would go around and assassinate, any pro-Jewish, but really pro-Western kind of element. And then those other sides would assassinate them back and forth, and they
Right.
would get into street fights, very similar to the Spanish, Revolution, right? The pre-Spanish Revolution, and some of the Iron Guardists actually went to Spain to fight, for Franco, and they died. A huge element of the Iron Guard, leadership-wise, passed away. Well, died in combat in the Spanish Revolution,
Yeah.
Civil War. Civil War, right? And that kind of really hurt the Iron Guard to a certain degree. But so they got more and more radical, right? More and more violent, to the point where they were making death lists. They were going to Bucharest and assassinating professors and that kind of stuff. They were more and more religiously fanatic, right? Which is very interesting compared to the other fascist movements that, as they went along, they became less religious, while these guys became more and more orthodox, more and more, and
Yes.
carrying icons and stuff, and they're kind of obsessed with that, to the point where to end the story, right, is basically the king had them arrested, a bunch of them arrested, their leadership, and had them choked to death. They had him garroted, had Cordreanu garroted, and that was it. That was the end of them, right? Um,
Yes.
at least that was the end of the more mystical kind of like element. Um,
Yeah.
After that, the king got deposed,
Hmm.
right? And he got deposed because he threw in with the early Germans at first, and they gave chunks of the that greater Romania. Well, they gave it back to the Russians during the Ribbentrop Act, and the Romanians are like, what the fuck? This Austro-Hungarian king or whatever is screwing us, and we had this, and now we lost it. So they
Yeah.
deposed him. He ran away into exile to Mexico, interestingly enough,
Sure.
and um, we had a true fascist dictatorship, right? Which was a general,
Okay.
Ion Antonescu, right? And Ion Antonescu was a general, but he was an elite, right? He was an elitist. He was from the elite class. The army was an elite organization, like at least the officer class, right? Unlike in
Yes.
Spanish Civil War, right? And they were kind of loyal to the general, and they were loyal to that, and they were not loyal to the fascists or to the Iron Guardists at all. Like they were actually
Yeah.
enemies. And it's a very interesting thing that the army was loyal to the army, and that's it, not to
Yeah.
the
Because
Guardists.
it generally, and this is relatively universal throughout the world, that the army, the standing military, tends to be one of the most right wing elements
Right.
within a country.
And the Navy is usually one of the most left wing elements. No,
Fair
seriously.
enough. I
Where did
did not know.
where did the Soviet
Okay.
revolution? Where did the communist revolution start? At Petrograd
Interesting.
with the Soviet Navy, right?
Okay.
They mutinied, right? In the Spanish Civil War, the Spanish Navy was on the Republican side. All the Navy officers,
This
uh,
okay.
yeah, the Navy always goes left.
I would be curious to tease that out and figure out why. That
Oh, I
interesting.
have a theory we talked about on our kind of podcast. It's because of the much stricter officer enlisted separation on those ships, right? In a land army,
Okay.
you have your lieutenant hanging out with the corporal. You have the
Yes.
buddies, right? You have the Frodo Samwise element, right? In
A good lieutenant should be able to lead from the front.
Right. In the Navy, though,
Yes.
you have wardrooms where the officers eat by themselves and they eat
Yep.
great food while the other guys are working in a boiler, starving. You know,
Interesting.
so they're much more susceptible to communist kind of agitation and mutiny and stuff. I mean, it was the Russian
Huh.
Navy that really started
Okay.
the Soviet, and like I said, if you look at the Spanish Civil War, same thing happened, right? And it's
Yeah.
always like that, right? You always have the navies tend to always go, or at least the enlisted side of the navies always tend to go to the left. Yeah.
That's a good catch. Yeah. Never even thought about it. Okay.
Um, but yeah, so Ion Antonescu, he kind of played all sides to the very end. He kind of played all sides to the very end, right? And he brought
Yes.
in kind of the lieutenant of the Iron Guard. And this is like, remember now Cordreanu's dead. He got garroted by,
Yes.
originally the story was that the king that he tried to escape prison and the guard shot him. That was the story. What really happened was the king ordered his death. The guards garroted him, dipped his body in acid, and buried him in an unmarked grave.
Yep.
Right. Um, so the movement was kind of lost. A bunch of them went into exile. King is deposed. Ion Antonescu takes over, and technically, the new king of Romania is Michael. Right. So Michael's young though. He's like basically a teenager at this time. Okay, and he's a young guy, and you can look up King Michael of Romania. He's actually kind of a handsome dude. He's got a lot of riz. Okay, a lot of drip in his pictures, and he like there's statues all over Bucharest of him. I saw him like 2 years
Yes.
ago when I was there. So I went to I mean sorry. So he goes, Ion Antonescu, a lot of these Iron Guardians dudes, they go into exile into Germany, at least a faction of them, specifically one named Horia Sima. And when Antonescu takes power and gets rid of Carol, he comes back to Romania and he kind of makes a joint government with the military. And he brings in a lot of the Legionnaire guys into the government. And this was kind of a ploy by the other right wingers because they knew these guys were extremist retards and they would basically shoot themselves in the foot. Right? I can't hear. I think your volume died. Oh,
Yeah.
there you go. So it was kind of a ploy, right? It was kind of like how like you let extreme people take over. There you go. There he is. See, he's got a lot of drip, man.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and I was thinking too. I misspoke a little bit on the army, because what I was trying to say earlier was, I said, the army tends to come in and they are the most right wing, and that's not actually what I'm trying to say. The army comes in and they bring in order.
They do.
They
They do.
they establish order, and that is their major concern. And so, yeah, if Cordreanu and his cadre are right wing to the point of causing chaos, then yeah, the army is going to push back and say, no, we're not having this.
Right. And that was a huge element, right? Because these guys were a fascist movement that was not military, right?
Right.
They're very like separate from the military. And the military was always aligned with the royalty and the nobility in the country. And it, it it was very much, they just didn't go for it, right? They didn't go for the more extreme stuff. So towards, so now that you have a general in charge, he's a hardcore anti-Semite, right? Not the most hardcore anti-Semite, though, but up there, right? He really hated gypsies and stuff, though, right? And his name is
Mm-hmm.
Ion Antonescu. If you want to look him up, Ion Antonescu, right? Uh, and he finally realizes that, like, okay, we got to throw in with the Germans, and they throw in with the Germans, right? And he brings in Sema, and Sema was Iron Guards, because now he's got all these legionnaires running around, fucking starting shit left and right. So he needs to like placate them, right? So he brings Sema in, and it's kind of a ploy because he knows this guy's going to be a crazy dumbass, right? And that's what he does basically. Sema does. He starts becoming more of a terrorist, to the point where Yonan Tanescu is like, okay, I need to get rid of these guys. They're becoming dangerous to like the cause, right? And right, and basically the SS, right? Like the SS guys, like the Germans, they tell Antonescu, like, hey man, you need to get a hold of these guys. They're out there. They're going to cause us problems. Like, we're trying to like
Yes.
fight the Russians here, and we don't need these guys like being complete and total retards out here, right? Because what they were doing is they were basically like destroying all the businesses, and trying to like just, they're making it look
Wait,
really bad.
there is. Do you think there's an element there when Cordreanu is gone, that they lost their better angel to
Oh
some
yeah,
degree?
absolutely, to a certain degree, right? It was a cult of personality that lost its personality, and when they brought Sema in, right, it just went
Yes.
went to shit, right? And they basically had Antonescu decided to purge them, get rid of them completely, right?
Yep.
So they decided to rebel against his government, but they didn't rebel by attacking the military. The way they rebelled was they decided to just kill a bunch of Jews, right? So they basically chimped out, like off the deep end in Bucharest, and they started burning synagogues down and all this stuff. And it was the basically Romanian fascist army that stopped these guys from burning a bunch of Jews. It was like a complete insanity when you think about it. It's basically right wingers fighting right wingers, or fascists fighting fascists, right?
Yes.
So at this point, he's like, fuck these guys, and just had them all executed. Basically, like he called for the arrest of anybody that was alive.
Antonescu.
Yeah, Antonescu, right? That was
Yeah.
aligned with the Iron Guard, and um, had them basically 24 hours execution or trial, or whatever, right? And got rid of them completely. And Horace Sema, who was the successor to Cordreanu, he basically
Yes.
hightailed it, and he first went to Germany because he had a bunch of SS friends, and he hid in Germany for a while. Um, and then after the fall of Germany, he ended up going to, I believe, Spain, and he spent the rest of his life in Spain. He died in the
Okay.
90s. He outlived Francisco Franco. He outlived everybody, basically, but he died in the 90s, I believe, which is kind of insane when you think about it, right? Um,
As in the 1990s, or
yeah, yeah,
he
yeah,
lived?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
Pretty wild, right? And
Yes.
he escaped, but he wrote, he was blamed, as he was basically considered, that by the time like that Cordano died, there were so many factions in the Iron Guard. Like there was the SS factions that were supported by the Germans, there was the
Okay.
nationalists, there was like the religious factions. Cordiano's like brothers and father himself hated what the Iron Guard became after his death, and they fought each
When
other.
Sema was in the
Yeah, when
yeah.
Simo was in charge, right? And SEMA eventually, in like weird like neo-Nazi neo-fascist groups, there's still like SEMA types and anti-SEMA types, and like a lot of like that
Okay.
in the National Front thing, like in the Strasserite guys in England and stuff. Those guys tend to be
Okay.
like into the SEMA stuff. But
No
interestingly enough,
kid. Okay.
like one of the premier kind of books on new European fascism and stuff comes from SEMA, because he wrote it in the 60s, I believe. Of course, it's
Yeah.
his book, right? So it's like his opinions, right? But right. So it's but anyways, Antonescu basically becomes the dictator. He throws in like the entire Romanian military against the Soviets, invades, takes part in Operation Barbarossa, and it's a fucking disaster. Like anybody that reads history, right? And you know what he does is, very interesting enough, he is not really big into purging Jews. He's not really big into local anti-Semitism, right? He never really
Okay.
wanted to, like, at least Romanian Jews. He was kind of a nationalist, and he considered the Jews part of Romania also, but he really hated foreign Jews. So the Romanians,
Okay.
he did some pretty heinous stuff in Ukraine specifically, right? To the kind
Yeah.
of Ukrainian Jews and up, but not the ones in Romania, right? The ones over there. It
Yes.
was like, like
Okay.
it was just mental illness. I mean, it was like just evil all around, right? Because when you think about it, like you just absorb the spirit of the time to they
Okay.
all killed each other, right?
So, Cordreanu, he's dead. SEMA assumes power, and you touched on this. I want to dig into it a little bit more. Did the Christian element sort of get pushed to the back end within the Iron Guard? The whole
Well,
idea of orthodoxy.
so
And yeah.
once again, right, that we have to look at the political element from today, right?
Okay.
Uh, so, for example, the bishop in charge of the Romanian Orthodox Church abroad in in America, for example, up until like the
Yes.
80s, right? Well, he was a member of the Iron Guard, and he was one of the
No
members,
kidding.
friends with SEMA, who initiated the Bucharest program, right?
Okay.
But he was the bishop of Romanian Orthodox Church in America, right?
Okay. So this is actually an aspect too that we haven't touched on at all. Um, were any of the patriarchs, any of the bishops, did did the church itself within Romania or within Europe have anything to say in regards to the Iron Guard?
Yeah, yes and no. Yes and
Okay.
no. It's really what it comes down to is the very different kind of approach of politics when it comes to the Eastern Orthodox Church compared to, like, we know your Roman Catholics, right, which have one
Yeah.
head. Um, there's this different viewpoint on how politics and religion mix in the
Yep.
Orthodox world. There's this idea of symphonia, where the government and the church run things together, right? There's no real separation of state, right? Now you have to understand that the Iron Guard was never in charge of the country, right? So the church never really had to deal with them, because they had a king, right? That's who was in charge of the
Okay.
country, right? King Carol, and then Michael after that, right?
Hmm.
So that's who any patriarch would have dealt with, right? Because that's who's leading the country. The guard
Okay.
has never won elections, right? They never won democratic
Yeah.
elections or took over the parliament, right? So they
Hmm.
were more a political element, right? Now, were there priests that were absolutely guardists? Absolutely, right?
Yeah.
Just like, there's Jesuits in the Roman Catholic Church that were hardcore communists, right?
Hmm.
At least in practice, but maybe not officially, right?
Right. Yep.
So absolutely, especially, like, I mean, they would bless guard stuff. They would like
Okay.
do ceremonies for him and stuff, and weddings and all
Hmm.
that stuff. So yes, right. But what would they have a problem with? You know what I mean? Right? Like, that's kind of the thing with, like we think of, like, when we, like, right now
Okay.
we're looking at it from a 21st century,
Yeah. Okay.
the right fascism is the boogeyman, right? So we're like,
Yes.
well, did they take the side of them? Okay, but we're not there, right? We're not in the present. They're not bad, Look at these guys; they're
Yeah.
just good Christians, right? Who want to
Yes.
take care of their country, protect it from evil communists, foreigners, right? So what would they? Yeah, and you know what I mean, right? You know what I mean? Like
Hmm.
if when you think about it,
Yeah.
right? Like, oh, but they don't like Jews. Yeah, and neither do we because we're Christians, right? Like, what Christian denomination in the early 20th century was a fan of Jews? No, none of them, right? Maybe like American dispensationalists and that kind of stuff, but
Right.
not any European. The Roman Catholic wasn't a fan of Jews, right?
Yes.
Until Vatican II and stuff. So why wouldn't they be? You know, why would they be
Hmm.
any? But at the same time, like, those guys were, in the same way you probably had like supporters and non-supporters stuff. But you did have, like I said, the you can look up the bishop, but it ended up coming out and he left. He ended up leaving the United States because he didn't want to cause a scandal for the community, and he left.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
he ended up dying in Spain, I believe, right, or in Portugal. Uh, and
A few of them went to Spain.
Spain and Portugal tend to be like the place where these guys go to. But once again, I mean, if you're into like religious studies or the studies of like the mysticism, basically anything Piaget writes. Okay, Piaget is not like everything that like Jordan Peterson and Piaget talk about, right? Really comes out of Mircea Eliade, um, you know, and that's who you want to read before you read those guys because he's a lot better and more interesting, right? His study of religion
Okay.
and mythology and stuff, and he was the
Yeah.
chair of the University of Chicago, and like I said, he was a hardcore Guardist, and nobody at the
No
University of
kidding.
you can look him up. I'll put his name in the chat real fast.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let me see how I do this chat thing on this. I usually I use a StreamYard for ours.
Right. Fair enough. I think down in the bottom left corner as you're looking at it. Yeah, you found
There
it.
you go. Right.
Okay.
And I mean, this is the guy that was a professor while Obama was going there. Right. Just
Yes.
so we
Okay.
put this in perspective. You know what I mean? Um, he was an Iron
Wow.
Guard.
Now that you
Right.
say it, that's
Right.
wow.
Okay.
Okay.
So that's why there's this element of like, oh, he wasn't allowed to go back to Romania at all because he never actually denounced the Iron Guard. So the communists like were mad at him.
Good
Right.
for him.
Right. And not until much later, like after the fall of this, the communism and Ceausescu and stuff. Right. So
Okay.
to kind of end the story, at least, right? So Ion Antonescu, the Romanians get their asses kicked in Operation Barbarossa, just like the Germans get their asses kicked, right? And now the Soviet Union is steamrolling down, right? And they're like, oh crap, what are we gonna do now? So they do what every good negotiator does: is they switch sides. they they
Yeah.
they're like, yeah, we're gonna switch sides, and really you have basically one of the best coups of World War II. King Michael, along with some communists, decide to basically oust Antonescu, right?
No
And
kidding. Okay.
they get rid of him, they arrest him, and the Romanian army basically surrenders and switches sides. It joins with the Russians, right, and pulls back into Romania. Um, and it's a very bloodless coup. Like not a lot of
Yeah.
stuff happens at this time, right?
So with it, just to make sure I'm keeping up correctly, World War II, we were still dealing with Carol,
Right.
and
And
then
Michael,
in the
in
in
the
the
middle of
midst of
World War
world,
II, Michael takes over.
yes, and in between Carol and Michael, you had Antonescu.
Correct.
Holy cow!
But the
Okay.
entire time Antonescu um, was in charge, Michael was kind of like the puppet king because he was young. If you look at the
Okay.
pictures of him, he was like a kid. And he's not a kid; he's like 20.
Right.
Uh, so and he had fascist leanings. He wasn't a but he hated his dad. That was a huge big thing. Like he never spoke to his dad after 1940. After his dad went in
Okay.
exile, he never
Right.
his entire life never spoke. I mean, I think he died in 2017 and never spoke to his father afterwards.
Okay.
Right. Because his father cheated on his mom and had all these affairs and settled with his mistress,
He
right?
wasn't kingly.
Yeah, exactly. He wasn't kingly at all, right?
Yeah.
He returned to Romania in 1990 for the first time since the end of World War II, right? And so, anyways, I need to explain why he left, right? So he kind of allies with the communists. He gets rid of the fascists because he realizes that if he realizes that if they fight to the death, which is what Antonescu and was planning on doing, you're going to have the Soviet Union just steamroll Romania. Right? It's going
Yeah.
to be it's going to be and they're going to do the same stuff that they ended up doing to Germany. After World War II, the rape and the murder of Eastern
Oh yeah.
Germany and all this stuff, right? And they were like, no, 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 we're going to be smart about it. So they basically they brought in like the kind of like the communist revolutionary types into the fold, and they
Yeah.
basically made a buffer, like welcoming the Soviet Union, right? There was a lot of
Yeah.
while this was going on, there was a lot of Soviet the whole time. There's still communist, like organic communists, right? Um,
Within Romania. Yeah.
Within
Okay.
Romania, and some of them even went to Russia during that because they were very much like that. Matter of fact, my family was on that side of the kind of divide,
Mm-hmm.
interestingly enough, right? And there are also still intellectual guys that wanted what's best for everybody, and they figured that
Yeah.
the Russian side was the better option, right?
Well, and
The
it does come down to if the Soviets are going to if the Soviets are going excuse me if we're going to become Soviet anyways, let's do it in the best way we can
right,
for us.
right. Well, interesting
Yep.
enough, right? And this could be a different podcast. The communists had different factions within them. Also, you had this like kind of local Jewish kind of side, which was with Anna Paquin, right? And Anna Paquin was active during the entire kind of interwar period, uh, and she spent time in prison and stuff. And it was a family of basically highly intelligent, kind of bourgeois Jews that brought communism to Romania from that, like the kind of intellectual side. Then there
Mm-hmm.
was the Russian element, which was kind of intellectual guys that study in Moscow during the early like Soviet Union days, and they were pro that. And then you had the peasant side, the pro kind of worker communists, which ended up being the ones that won, and that was what Ceausescu kind of came in. They all purged each other as soon as they all started purging each other, and the first people they purged was actually the Jewish communist side. And the Romanian communists were very, very unique, and it's very kind of interesting, right? They're very unique because they never, after about 10 years of kind of being under Soviet influence, they kind of rejected the Soviet side of things, especially during Ceausescu time. Like if you look at the Romanian communist flag, it was never a hammer and sickle red flag, right? It was still the Romanian flag. And that's because they blended communism with nationalism, and they kind of they really adopted an iron guard kind of model, right? Mixed with communism and
Yes.
peasant type stuff. And they're more similar to, you know, they're really into like the North Korean model uh, of communism than they were into the Soviet. They rejected the Soviet kind of model. And
Okay.
by the time 80s came around, Romania was the most hardcore, like kind of like the right wing of communism, if that makes sense, right? The Russians were like,
Sure.
you need to
Yeah.
calm the fuck down, like
Yep.
you're crazy with this communism. The Russians were liberals compared to the
Is this
Romanian
the right
communists.
one?
That's the right one, yeah.
Okay.
Um, and yeah, they were very much like the Korean kind of model of like hyper communism, right? And extreme with extreme repression, extreme this kind of stuff. Um, but I think what the point of all this, because we're like, why are we talking about this, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
what's the point? The point is it's interesting that we don't, obviously neither of us are Nazis. We're not supporters of, we're not anti-Semites. I don't even care about Jews whatsoever, right? Um, I like their humor. But what's interesting is that like I like Seinfeld. Who doesn't like Seinfeld? I don't know. Whatever, right? What's really why do we talk about this is because from a kind of a historical standpoint, we don't really study a lot of fascist kind of or like even right wing movements at all. You're
Yes.
you're like you're fascist like you're consent. You take your any American off the street and they have a Marvel movie kind of image of what's going on. Right?
Right.
There's a complete lack of complexity. And when I say this, I'm not talking about just like your average kind of like normie lefty or something like that. Even right wing guys are completely retarded when it comes to really understanding what the
Yes.
fuck they're talking about. Right? They don't
There's
realize.
a caricature of this great evil and they can't.
Right.
This goes back to what we were talking about a while ago. They can't even recognize that Cordreanu and, frankly, most of the fascist organizations were trying to deal with the problems that the society was faced with,
Right.
and
Well,
whether that was the agricultural issues or health issues or so on. Sorry, go ahead.
right. Well, I mean, like, there was that what was that stupid spree shooter, the terrible thing in Australia or New Zealand or whatever, where the guy
Oh,
shot
okay.
it. You know what I'm talking about?
The Christchurch one.
Yeah, the Christchurch thing, right? And he actually
Yeah.
had the Iron Guard flag scrolled in his rifle, right? Which is
Oh dear.
absurd, stupid. It's an absurd stupidity, right? Because when you think about it, like how stupid is that, right? First of all, like you're Australian or whatever, or New Zealander, right? Like get the fuck out of here, right? Like, dude, you can't apply any of this stuff to anything outside of Romania. Like it's about Romanians, Orthodox Christians, and that's it in the early 20th century. Like it
Yes.
doesn't apply to Romania today. It's completely irrelevant, right? It'd be a joke, right? Like, there's neo-Nazi types that are really into this shit over there, right? But for the most part, it's like it's a LARP, it's in the same way, like there's no Italian that's like, oh yeah, Mussolini, it's stupid, right?
Yeah.
It's like it's just in a way, like it's kind of like what's his name? Yukio Mishima, right? It's an aesthetic
Hmm.
like art piece, right? If you really approach
Okay.
it. Like he was not going to bring back the Empire of Japan by doing what he did in 1978 or whenever, when he killed himself on
Yeah.
live TV. But like it's interesting because we don't understand some of these motivations and we don't understand like the
Yeah.
organizational things, right? And we have this like comedy thing where all of a sudden these evil people started doing evil things
For no reason at
for no
all.
reason,
Right.
you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
And it's a complete like lack of like true understanding. Like, why do they do stuff? Why were they taking sides? And from if you're looking at the nuance that a lot of people fail to understand is that everything has factions, right? Like,
Yeah.
this is one of the things that like people always fail because they say, "Oh God, those lefties, they're not united people, right? They all hate each other in the same way everybody on the right hates each other, also, right? And your average American can't even define what being on the right means, So it's
are
like,
are you a Baptist? Are you
right,
a
right.
yeah,
Even
yeah,
online, like dorky LARPing like us, right? Because that's what we're doing, right? We're LARPing, right? As
yeah.
intellectuals here, like hate each other, right? Because some people are Baps a pervert and a degenerate. And then you got some guy that's like, Puritan, true Zoomer 1000 or whatever.
Yes.
You're a fan of like African Americans or something. It's like, shut up, dude. You know what I mean? Like it's just stupid. It's a LARP, right? And the reality is like you need to do stuff, but you can't do the stuff that they did in 1935 because it's not 1935. Okay.
Yeah.
Like one thing that people on the right need to realize is that there's no fascism. It got completely defeated, right? Every single fascist became a neoliberal. And it's just how it is, right? Just like there is no
Mhm.
communism in the world right now. There is no communism in the world, guys. China's not even a communist country. It's a neoliberal oligarchy, right? That owns like it's a cyberpunk techno nightmare over there, but it's not it's not. Marx would find it obscene, and so would like Lenin or Trotsky or
Sure.
any other, you know what I mean? So like we need to be realistic and we need to like understand history, but realize that like we can't LARP as Francisco Franco, like so many people like. I mean, everybody loves Franco because it seems like it's the funny thing, but what did Franco do? He did the same thing Antonescu did, right? So Franco won the war by aligning the Recollets, right, which were the Catholics, the army, which was his faction, and the what were they called? What are the fascists? The guys called?
Oh,
uh the guys with the hand holding the arrows or whatever, the phalangist, right?
thank you.
The phalanges were basically the Iron Guard of Spain, right? Well, when they took over, right, what the fuck did Franco do? He sidelined the phalangists, right? And he
Right.
chose
They're too hardcore.
they were too hardcore, and he put the Roman Catholic side in charge of Spain, right? Like, and when he died, well, while he was still, the dictator of Spain, the Roman Catholic Church was becoming gay communist Jesuits, right? And as
Right.
soon as he died, they rejected everything, so
Sure.
him and the phalangists fought and died because the communists were killing Catholic nuns and stuff. But
Right.
after he took over, the same Roman Catholics that they died for to protect became communist and rejected everything he did, and now Spain is a communist country, or a neoliberal communist country, right? So, oh, and they exhumed his body, and like got
Yeah.
rid of all his monuments, right? So the problem with right wing people is that they're all fucking retards for the most part, when it comes to loyalty, right?
Okay.
Like
Yeah.
if you look at history, like there's no unity whatsoever. Like the communists
Well,
didn't.
I do wonder if part of this is missing good because they're chasing perfection.
Oh, right, right.
Mm.
But look at like the right wing in the U.S. Right? They sell each other left and right. Like it's like as soon as somebody's in power, it's let's denounce right. All they do is punch right. The entirety of the history of the right wing in the last our lifetime is punching right. You
Yes.
never see anybody on the right ever like you and it's just it's like coded into the system. Like I think the moral of the story here is that the Iron Guard was not defeated by leftists; it was defeated by elite royalty, also on the right. You know what I mean, right?
Okay.
Including the Nazis defeated them because the Nazis were like, these guys are too extreme. Not get rid of them, because you know what? The Nazis cared less about ideology and more about winning a war. They cared
Well,
about,
yeah.
you know,
It's interesting too because if you go back, oh, here, so whoever's been listening, my very limited knowledge all comes from Cordreanu's autobiography. For the most part, eventually you have to get into some various other people because he was killed. Uh, and so, yeah, we could say it's biased, whatever, but there is this hope and there is this desire to see the good of the Romanian people. Um, I kind of got lost there where I was going with that, but it is just this idea of man, I don't know. I don't know if I'm gonna put. It just seemed like a good thing. It
right,
seemed like they were actually trying to do good, even more than the pragmatic and practical stuff that the Germans were doing. And it's like, oh, we're greater Germania, and we want to, let's throw off the yoke of whatever.
right,
That's an idea, but man, boots on the ground. The Iron Guard, at least for a moment, was trying to see the good
right.
of Romania.
It was a very romantic kind of thing, and I think it got lost in its extreme idolization of really anti-Semitism, really, in a
Okay.
way like their obsession with that was their undoing because
Okay.
it became an obsession to where that caused everything else to suffer,
Sure.
um and you see that. I mean, you can say that about the Germans too, and the Italians. Like Italians kind of yoked themselves to a insane cause that really had nothing to do with them, um
Mhm.
and in a way that the kind of like the World War II kind of destroyed the right forever to a certain degree,
Yeah.
right? You can't be on the right without being a bad guy automatically, right?
Are you familiar with Ed Dutton at all?
A little bit, yeah.
I was gonna say anybody who's listening to me is gonna plug their ears now because I kind of go down this route a lot. But I do. I think he's onto something when he says, "Look, guys, it's just the future as we know it right now is completely unsustainable, and so we're just in this portion of the cycle, and there will be a return of the right wing until that gets unbearable, and then the left wing, just that pendulum swing."
It just comes because we joked around about the right, the contemporary, right wing, the conservative side, which I anybody that studies politics and history knows that there is no right wing in the United States because democracy doesn't belong on the right whatsoever, right? So even the most arch conservative on the Republican Party is still a left winger. Okay, like
So
like
you and I are in agreement on this,
right.
but
You
I've
cannot you
got some
cannot
good
you
friends
cannot be a
that
constitutionalist and believe in freedom of speech and be on the right, dude. I'm sorry to tell you that, okay? All men are
I'm
not
just
created
saying.
equal does not belong on the right. like in any political philosophy in the history of humanity, like believing that kind of shit, like that the Bill of Rights said, like rights, that's nonsense. That's not a right-wing idea. It's a it's a French Revolution, Enlightenment idea, right?
Yeah.
So there's no true right on in modern world. We're living in a left world. And then yeah, so the conservatives are corny because you can't not be corny, because the only allowed political expression of conservatism is hillbilliness, right? And I like hillbillies,
Yes.
right? I mean, it's a dumb word, but like vulgar Americanism is the only allowed political expression of it's
Hmm.
basically like you know that kind of, it's the ICP of politics, right? In a way, it's
Ooh,
like it's
dig in,
corny,
dig into that.
but like harmless in a way, right? Because
Hmm.
you can be all
Okay,
like
there's no
blood.
power.
There's no power there, right?
Yeah.
The second the right becomes intellectual, the second the right has a professor, the second the right does anything like that, it becomes dangerous and it'll be immediately
Right.
destroyed. Right. The second it
Yep.
whiffs of any of the intellectualism of like, something like Cordreanu or even like the Phalangist or anything, that instant destruction, right? For the people that are
Yes.
in charge, because that's dangerous. So, go ahead, fucking open your can of Bud Light, watch your Blue Angels do, low riding things or
Yes.
whatever, and cheer as we bomb Iran. That ain't fucking right wing shit. You know what I mean? It's just
It's
it's
a pressure
clownery.
release,
Yeah,
and
it's a
it's
WWF.
containment. Yep.
Yeah, it's WWF. I mean, even though that stuff's cool, but so that's the reality of it, though. As soon
Okay.
as any like right wing movement starts doing anything outside its sphere, right? The right wing movements are allowed to like protest abortion. That's about it. That's like the only thing they're allowed to do,
Right.
right? Uh, start having like right wing like food drives or something like that, or like inner city action or something like that. Instantly destroyed, instantly. You know what I mean? But they won't
Yes.
do it because they're not really interested in that kind of stuff. All right, you know what I mean? Right?
Hmm.
Uh, why was why was Charlie Kirk effective? Because he spoke at universities.
Yeah.
He brought right wing into the university, right? Or at least areas that scratch right wingism.
Hmm.
Even though he was very milk toast, like
Right.
no,
Yep.
like
But
come on,
he
like
was he was affecting the youth.
right, right. Those guys were scary, right? Like, look, listen, okay. The one thing about that 2016 on kind of stuff, you got Jordan Peterson and all these kind of like, we consider those guys corny, right? But a lot of them they were intellectuals, right? They were interesting. They were, they dressed well and they had an image that seemed intelligent, right? And they contrasted really well against the blue-haired psychos
Well,
and
this is a
like,
good point.
you know what I mean? And that made them dangerous, right? That made them dangerous because look,
Man.
you and I discuss politics and we make decisions based on like intellectual thoughts and stuff. 99% of people just go off of vibes, right?
Okay.
They go, "Oh, I don't like this guy because he said mean." He said mean thing or something like that.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? That's how your average voter votes. That's how your average woman
Sure.
thinks. Like you probably like had your girlfriend or wife say shit that you're like cringe as fuck because they'll say like, "Oh, he's kind of a jerk," even though like he's right. You know exactly what I'm talking about, right? Most
Yeah.
people vote on it. Well, he's kind of a jerk, and the other guy's kind of cute or something. So that's what people do. Well, during George Bush era, the conservative side, because I hate calling them the right because there's no right wing,
Yeah.
the conservative side was corny, right? Like when you think of George Bush, you think of like idiocracy and like the flyover America, just all
Yep.
it was poverty coded and retard coded. Okay, let's be honest here,
Yeah.
right? And then Obama comes in and he's this intellectual, multicultural, mixed race guy, the future of America, and he just shits all over the conservatives, who are just a
Yep.
bunch of hillbillies or fat Walmart people that are like America and the planet's 2,000 years old and dinosaurs are fake. You know what I mean, right? Come on, it's South Park portrayal, but that's what it was. And then the pendulum swung, right? And the Reddit atheist became the picture of like the embarrassing thing, right? That
Yes.
and you have these guys like BAP and stuff, and now it's like aesthetic kind of like right wingism, and
Yeah.
it's
That
more
that was the wedge, I think.
right, and people don't give him credit enough for it. I'm glazing that dude, but like the people don't give him enough credit for it. He made it like those days on Twitter when he was early on posting and stuff, like he
Post physique.
he took the right wing away from the boring ass Midwestern Christian dorks, like the youth brigade of like incel Christians, right? And
Yeah.
because that's what the right wing was like, bow tie. I mean, look at the transformation of Tucker Carlson from being a bow tie dork to selling nicotine dips and stuff and having like
Right.
right, and it became
Yeah.
it became an aesthetic thing, right? And then it became dangerous, right? So what are we getting pushed upon us right now, right? We're back to chudism, right?
Hmm.
Right? You think it's not? I think it's absolutely intentional, right?
Okay.
Like I think that we for a minute. Do you remember that really cool? Like it wasn't cool, but that that magazine spread about like the New York conservatives, and it was all those like dudes like partying at them. It was like I think it was like New York Times or the New Yorker or whatever, and it looked cool. A bunch of
May
hot
last
chicks and
year.
like yeah, like right when Trump won the second election, there's
Okay.
a bunch of hot
Yes.
girls, like it was like Dime Square stuff,
Right.
and like it's like the new people, and look cool. They're all like drinking and wearing suits and stuff and everything, right? And that appeals to people, right? People want that, right? And then of course now we're switching back to portraying like the conservative side as being
The beer gut and yeah.
the fan boat drivers, and like that kind of
Yep.
stuff. And you don't think that's intentional? It's absolutely intentional. It's absolutely
It's
intentional.
interesting because there was a well, see, that's an argument. Who have I heard talk about this? Um, uh, Maybe Bap has said it. I'm trying to remember who I remember talking about it, but just this idea that the the right, such as it is, the right in the U.S. and in Europe was able to thrive in that time of roughly 2014 up to 24 because they had to figure out a way to be smart about it, and they had to offer more than vibes.
Right.
And so that's when you saw bat blow up. That's when you saw people jump into Degum. Who am I thinking? Handbook for Right Wing Youth: Revolt Against the Modern World.
Evola,
Ride the Tiger. Thank you.
Evola, Julius
Right.
Evola, who was a very much big fan of Cordreanu and met him, I believe, and he was
Oh, I
very
didn't
much
know that.
inspired by him. Yeah, Mircea
Sure.
Eliade was actually a very good friend. Mircea Eliade, the professor at
Uh huh.
University of Chicago,
Chicago. Yeah. Yeah.
was a very big friend of Eliade, and I believe introduced Cordreanu to Eliade, if I'm correct. I might don't quote me on it, but Eliade
Yeah.
comments on Evola's love of Cordreanu in one of his
Okay.
articles. So they're all connected. Yeah, no, absolutely, right? Like that bringing in the more esoteric right wing stuff into it. That
Mhm.
was instrumental in that, right? Uh,
Because you
one-
had to it's like you were talking about it earlier. You couldn't get away with the we're right wing, we're conservative, and
yeah,
so you could still get to right wing thought, and you could still get to um, views that have the ability to change the world, but it had to be done in a way that was simultaneously productive and unable to be forced into a caricature.
right. I mean, look, a good example is Twitter sucks now. I'm sorry, I'm sorry, Elon Musk, X sucks. I deleted my account recently, like for the fifth time because I can't stand it. Every time I come back, and during the height of like 2016 to like well through the first like Biden administration, I had like an account with like 10,000 plus followers, and like I liked it. And you'd go on there and you'd find intelligent stuff on there. This is like the height of
Yes.
BAP and all those guys, uh, uh, Lovecraft, H.P. Lovecraft or whatever, all those
I was
guys, right?
thinking it, Mike Ma, right? Did you ever
Right.
read Gothic
Yes, yes,
Violence or
McMahon. Yeah,
anything?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
It
I
was
read his
just
book.
when that stuff was coming out, it was like, what in the world am I putting in here right now? I actually have to interact with it and consider what's being said.
Right, the Borzoi guy. Do you remember the Borzoi guy? I forgot his name. There's a lot of these guys that are really interesting, Um, And now it's just Indian slop, man. It's like boomer slop and Indian slop, and it's like I can't. Dude, I was on it the other day. I think I kept my
Yes.
account because I like the only reason I kept it for like so long was because I was like looking at your replies, you know, to see if when
Yeah.
we're gonna do this. And I was like, I finally said, "Fuck it," this week. You know, I was like, I couldn't. I like I opened it. I'm like, I hate this. Right? Like now,
Yes.
Substack is what Twitter used to be back in the day. Now, you know,
Okay.
it's just it's where it's at really, but it's a lot more like
Yeah.
more bloggy than Twittery. You know, it's not as good as Twitter, but the Substack like has like a cloned Twitter program, and
Okay.
it's just much better. All the guys have moved
Yeah.
over to it for the most part, you know. But yeah, like that the death of Twitter is a great example of, you know, that, well, the
Okay.
death of intellectual Twitter is a great example of it,
Yeah.
because you know, when the right wing guys, you know, like BAP and those guys had to be like covert when the
Yes.
sword of Democles hung over them, you know, because
Yeah.
any minute now some blue haired like programmer transgender woman is gonna like delete their account forever. They have to be intelligent. They have to skirt, you know, and
Yes.
not be complete and total tards about it. And that leads to creativity, right? Um,
Yeah.
like it's just how like in any artistic form, right? When you put limitations on yourself, you end up being much more
Yes.
creative, you know, like, oh, I'm
Right.
only going to use the shades of blue, you know, or I'm only going to do this, or I'm only going to use
I'm
the
only going
straight
to shoot
lines
at
or something.
35 millimeters. If right, if you're into
Right,
photography,
right. Right, exactly.
yes.
Only do black and white, or you know, and it creates like these limitations create the ability to be ingenious and kind of go around that stuff, which
Oh man.
the free for all and like the monetization element of it right now, it leads to just third world slop. Twitter would be fine if you could ban
Yeah.
foreigners from it, you know, like if you could do like you know, localized blocking, it'd be okay. But
Right.
ultimately, if you can say anything, it's not really that interesting, right? It's how like
Yes.
if you like, well, it's like my daughter, right? Like I don't have any rules about her, you know, saying cuss words, for example, right? I don't care. She can say fuck, shit, whatever, all she wants, right? And then when I first told her that, she's like, fuck, 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 shit, shit, shit. And that's it. And I was like, well, it looks trashy and you sound stupid. And you know what she doesn't do? She
Yeah.
doesn't cuss, right?
Yeah.
Because there's nothing, there's no power to it. There's no magic in it, you know? And that's what happened to
Yes.
Twitter.
Okay.
Like, when if you could just be a total like obscene retard, it's like, it's like, you know how like everybody's into like, you know, like jokeful anti-Semitism now. It's not
Hmm.
cool. It's not like edgy, you know. It's like
Yes.
I know people that are like absolute normies, you know, saying like the most stupid like anti-Semitic stuff and like, you know, quoting the USS Liberty and all this stuff. And I'm like,
Yes.
just it doesn't come off as intelligent or interesting. It comes off like you don't even know what that is. You didn't know what that was in like a year
Well,
ago, you know?
so there
Like
was this. It's this idea too. Where we're on YouTube, so I'm gonna censor myself. But this was never about saying the N word
right, right,
and laughing about it. Like if that's the right wing that you're talking about, then we are on two different pages.
right, right, right,
This is, you know, we're over here talking about structural issues and talking about how do we how do we prescribe and potentially get to the future we want to realize for our families, for our culture, for blah blah blah.
right.
But if it's just about saying these words and laughing about, oh, I
Right.
guess I shouldn't have said that, then it doesn't matter.
Exactly. And you know, it's like we're not talking about, you know, fascism, communism, or any of that stuff because we want to do this. Because we, you know, anybody that has an IQ above like 75 knows we're not heading towards a fascist government ever in this country, right? We're not having a Christian nationalist government in this country. That's complete and total retardation, right? Well, you'd have to, in order to have a Christian nationalist government, you'd have to have a nation of Christians first, and we don't have that, all right? And
Okay.
then the second part is you'd have to have a nation of the same kind of Christians, right? Not
Sure.
1,000 different Protestant denominations. You know, between me and my church right now, it's a 30-minute drive, and I pass 17 different churches that all disagree with each other, right?
Yep.
And you extrapolate that for the rest of the country. It's Christian nationalism. It's a joke, right? All these are like leftist boogeymen or complete and total LARPs to a real degree,
Right.
right? I mean, you can't even really have American nationalism because you have 5 American nationalists in the same room and you ask them, well, define an American nationalist or an American nation, and none of them can do it, and they start stabbing each other because one of them's like, well, my parents are Scots Irish, and then the other guy's like, well, that's not really American. They have to be Anglo-Saxon Protestant, and they start stabbing each other, right? So, so like the whole thing, like, there's more fundamental problems, which is what is the spirit, the core of like what's going on, and the reality is because we need to like look back at the past, the 20th century, and kind of put it behind us and we're learning about, I think what's fascinating, why we should talk about stuff like the Iron Guard or the Nazis or the
Hmm.
communists, is that so much of our current political climate is a Marvel movie version of it, and it's predicated
Yes.
on this Marvel movie version of it, right? Which is a huge bit of American propaganda that Americans themselves believed, and when we start
Yeah.
taking step
Okay.
backs and going, maybe that wasn't it, right? I mean, you have American propaganda, or at least right-wing propaganda, conservative American propaganda from like the Reagan era, that's still embedded in a lot of Americans. Where I had a
Yeah.
boomer tell me that, like, yo, you lived in Japan, bro. Like, I mean, Japan's great and all, but like, at least it's not like they don't really have any freedoms or anything. I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about, boomer? Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know or like I was just in Europe like a year ago, and it's like every grocery store has better food than America, right? And
Yes.
I hate that, right? Like I could take I was walking down Bucharest, and in Bucharest, down the middle of the street, in the middle of the city, in the center of the city, with my daughter, who was 5 at the time, right? And holding a beer in my hand and a cigarette in the other, and it's like 2 in the morning, and there's tons of kids running around and like adults, and it's all safe and everybody, and I go, why can't I have that back in where I live? Like, what the
Right.
fuck? My wife, the American, she's like, can we just move here? Like, can we, and I'm like,
Yeah.
but we can't, the guys on the right, on the American conservatives are like, America number one, but they can't accept that maybe it's not number one all the time in everything, because they've
Yes.
allowed it to not become number one. Guess what? I lived in
Wait.
Tokyo.
Yeah, and there is this element of if you're going to have some form of cultural chauvinism,
Right,
it has to be based in reality. And so there does seem to be this sort of kickback at times where if I can't say that America's the best at everything, I'm doing it wrong.
right,
And
and
it's
we
like,
can't.
well, maybe just be honest about what's going on.
Right,
And
and
if we want America to be the best, well, maybe we have to recognize that it isn't the best at everything right now.
right. I mean, it can be the best of a lot of things, but
Sure.
and that's the reality. Is like, if we live in a Marvel universe kind of world of thinking, right, which is this very like just kind of post World War II Marvel universe world. This Captain Kirk, Star Trek, his understanding of history. By the way, my theory is that Star Trek tells you everything you need to know about America. Uh, that's a different topic, right? Different eras of Star Trek
For another
match
yeah, for
for
another
another
night.
6 hours, right? Different eras of Star Trek match the era of America, from like the kind of
Interesting.
libertarian Kirk era to the Deep Space Nine rejection of global empire, and that kind of stuff, right? Um,
Okay.
but yeah, you can't fix things if you can't accept things, right? Like, we
Yeah.
have a country right now that is a superpower, like that we pretend is a third world country, right? And I'm talking about like China,
Hmm.
right? We pretend that Americans, if you take your average American, his he you ask him what's going on in China, what does China look like today, right?
Yes.
They'll say like, oh, it's like some like rice paddy, and they imagine like something like
They're
Vietnam
only
War.
allowed to have one child.
Right, or just all kinds of ridiculousness, right? Like,
Yeah.
like Cultural Revolution, Mao Zedong era, and they're all walking around.
Uh-huh.
But that's
Right.
not what China looks like right now. And that's not what the Chinese are right now. It is a world
Yeah.
superpower. I've been to Beijing, and I've only in passing in an airport, but I've been to Hong Kong, and I've been to Taiwan, which are I have friends from those places, and you can just open the internet and look at a city in like Beijing or something like that, right? It is not they're not walking around in sandals and rice fields and stuff,
Yes.
and they have stuff, and I've met people from China, and they're rich, and they're buying property all over the United States, and they're and
Which is a
it's a different story, right? The fact that we're
right.
doing that,
We're
right?
letting them do it, but
Right. Well, I mean, but like I started a lot of shit on Substack when I said, like, when I specifically attacked right wingers over the birthright citizenship thing, I was like, "Oh no, you just noticed? It's been the fucking thing for the last forever." You know,
Right.
anybody that's lived in Southern California knows that as far back as like the 80s, rich Chinese people were coming to Irvine, California, and going to live in birthing centers that they were paying money for, and basically like there was tons of houses and like hotels designated specifically for rich Chinese people to give birth in Irvine, California, or up and down the
Sure.
coast, right? So they can, so they can like be dual citizens, right? Because what's great to have the passport of two superpowers, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Right.
Like you'd be retarded not to, if like you are a citizen of the United States but a Chinese, you don't have to even live in the U.S. Now you have every right. If a boy is born in Irvine, California, to Chinese parents, he's an American. He has every single right you do, right? Every He's equal to
It's
you in every
wild.
way, shape, or form. He goes back to China. He becomes a CEO of whatever Chinese corporation. Now he can use his power as a U.S. citizen to have full power and full tax. He doesn't have to be. He's not a foreign entity. He's a goddamn American, right? Just like you, just like George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, right, bro? Right? But this is not new, right?
No,
This is
it's
nothing
not.
new. But
Nope.
Republicans and all the conservatives are, oh my God, it's what a big deal. Like they think this is new. How do you think half of Seattle is Chinese owned? Right? Like what? You don't think the Indians are doing this? The high class Brahmins? There's a reason why they're all, they've been doing this for decades now, right? Because that law
Well,
has been
it's curious too because everything you're saying right now, if we go back, an hour in the stream or so, that was the exact same stuff that the Iron Guard was recognizing. But like you just
right,
said 10 minutes ago too, they were able to come at it and say we are Romanian and we are Orthodox. They had an identity
right.
that that they could pursue. And so it is interesting to see. I don't know if we're at the beginning stages of forming an identity or if we are incapable of having a particular identity as we work through these issues over the next couple of decades.
Well, I think, and this is like historical, speculation and stupidity on my part, and I'm not advocating or any of this stuff, right?
Yeah,
I think that the idea is that you can't have a nations and empires are incompatible. Okay, it's just how it's just the
yes,
truth, right?
go on.
And right now we're an empire, and we
Okay,
can't have like the nation, the idea of a people, a unique people, is
sure.
incompatible with the benefit with the profits of an empire. You can't have
Yeah,
that, right? And um,
it was Rome that caused the death of Rome.
right, exactly that. So you
Yeah,
can never have. But after Rome, after the collapse of Rome, you had the ethnogenesis of individual peoples, right? And,
sure.
the Franks and the Germans, right? And the
Hmm.
Gauls, and the Gauls were the Franks, right? The Gauls became the Franks, and blah blah, right? And the Spanish and all the different, like, Romance speaking language, Romanians, right? Are ethnogenesis out of the Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire, and so the Greeks, right? Um, and you have that kind of came out of that. Europe is a post-Roman Empire creation. Now,
Sure.
can that happen in the American Empire? 'Cause let's be honest, that's what it is. It might, and I say that if you doubt people, people in the right sphere or whatever always go, well, you should look at the Weimar Republic, right? That's what we should look
Hmm.
at, or you should look, Weimerica or whatever, right? I always
Hmm.
think that's kind of wrong. I think that's the wrong place to look at as a example. I think Rome is actually a wrong place to look at example. The
Okay.
empire that the United States is most like, and it's dying in the same way, is Venice, right?
Okay.
The Venetian republics, right? And I don't know if you're familiar with Venice. I highly recommend you read some books on
Not
Venice, right?
particularly.
The
Okay.
Venetians were founded, a scrappy country in a fucking swamp, the city of Venice, right? The Republic of Venice, by pirates and adventurers, and they conquered that entire like area of the Mediterranean through their merchant fleets, and they were all basically pirates, merchants, adventurers, just badasses, right? Very similar, and they turned a swamp basically into one of the greatest cities in history, Venice.
Mhm.
Um, but it's a swamp, it's a disgusting malarial pit, right? But when you think of Venice, you don't think of that. You think that's what it was when it first started, and in a few hundred years, they became, they controlled the Mediterranean, right? They were the most
Mhm.
powerful. They didn't have a lot of land, they had a lot of influence, and they had a lot of ships, and they
Yes.
they had outposts all the way up into Russia, right? That's how powerful they were, right? And but what happened was, by the time more and more time passed, they didn't get conquered, they didn't lose out, right? Their upper classes became more and more domesticated. Instead of being led by adventurers and warriors, they became perverts and weirdos and degenerates,
Yeah.
and they went from being
It's
merchant.
the overused
Yeah,
meme. It's the
yeah,
overused meme,
yeah.
but the truth, that idea of
Weak
daggum,
men. Yeah,
exactly, strong
right.
men, and yep.
Right, and that's Venice right there. And by the time they fell completely, Napoleon just walked in and just took them over. Didn't even fight him or anything like that. And they were doing carnivals and Marquis de Sade stuff and all those weird masks and
Oof.
just being weird degenerate
There's a
perverts, right?
reference.
You know what I mean, right?
Right.
And that's where the whole Venetian mask thing comes. The carnival comes from Venice, but that's what they were doing. They're just being perverts and
Right.
weirdos, and like, but 500 years before, they owned the Mediterranean, and they destroyed Muslim fleets, and that kind of stuff. And it's slow decline. That's what's going to happen, and we might
Hmm.
have genesis of if it is, it's really going to be a state type thing, like maybe certain regions, but we don't know, because what any of these people didn't have. They didn't have the internet. They didn't have
Yep.
space. You know what I mean? Nuclear weapons and lasers and shit.
Travel was not
Yeah,
nearly as easy.
right.
The fact that we can get in a vehicle, and nearly any vehicle in the U.S. can move us hundreds of miles before we literally have to stop. That's a
Right.
crazy idea.
The fact that we're having this conversation live streamed to probably hundreds
Hmm.
of people, across state lines, is different. So we don't know. We really don't know, right? But I think that what we do need to know is, I need to let myself go. I'm stuck in me being a host mode because I didn't realize it was 11:30. I got to go to work tomorrow. Um,
Fair enough. Well,
Disgusting. How
yeah,
can an
that's fine.
intellectual have to work?
I think you already headed that way, but put a bow on it. What should we take from this stream tonight? I
Well,
mean, this was fantastic. I love the history, but if we encapsulated it, what should we gather?
what I think that we need to look at, one, is that we need to really understand the history, right? Really understand the why, and realize that it's a lot more complex. But in a practical way, we have to realize that sometimes, like, real politic and factions, that there's just a reality. Like, do not over there's a tendency with people that discover politics or religion or anything like that, right? To I think it's improper word, idolize or fetishize, like, elements of politics or religion, or cultural elements. And people are people. They're all scum for the most part. Like, I'm sorry. I'm like, I guess I'm a nihilist sometimes when it comes to, I'm a doomer a bit. But it's like, just because these guys say that they're on the right doesn't mean that they won't sell you out. Right? Like, oh yeah, the fascists of the world unite. Yeah, well, guess what? The Iron Guard was killed by the Germans, because they would rather have oil than ideology, right? Because oil powers Messerschmitts and Tiger tanks. Ideology doesn't power anything. So you got to be practical in life. The Order of Archangel Michael, right? They were also betrayed by a lot of Christians, right? Actual people in their church, because you know what? Um, you got to have a church to, you got to have a building. And if it gets blown up by your terrorist actions, it's not ideology. Once again, doesn't matter. Right. So you have to be practical, and you have to understand that, like, what really matters is the local individual level. Like, I know stuff, and I'm going to take care of myself, and not get caught up in, like, these, like, hyper politicized, obsessive kind of things. Right. And the
Okay.
reason in our podcast we never really talk about this kind of stuff, like World War II era stuff, is because
Hmm.
it's boomer kid, like, what's the shit that cats like?
Oh, catnip.
Yeah, it's boomer catnip, right? That's they love
Yeah,
this shit, right? And they'll get so mad and crazy if you question any idea. You know, oh god,
sure.
tell a boomer that maybe that you're a guy that doesn't agree with the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Oh my god,
Hmm.
they'll fucking die instantly. What? You don't think that,
Right.
instantly vaporizing 200,000 civilians is a good thing? You know? Like if you want to start a fight, bring that one up, you know?
You think the blockade
What?
of Germany was not a good
What?
thing?
Firebombing women and children? God, I'm proud of that, you know? I always used to piss off my military friends that telling them that like pilots are all cowards, like infantry guys shoot guns up close, and like I know I can see the whites of the eyes when I commit my war crimes. I don't drop them from 1,000 miles away like you know. That's what I used to tell all my pilot buddies, you know. I'm like, because infantrymen for life, you know. But I'm sorry, you get to go
Very good.
home. You know, I had to
Right.
live there the whole time. You know, like I actually had to pick up the body after I war crimed it. So just joking. I never war crimed anybody that I know. Anyways, but yeah, you know what I mean, right? Like there's I like messing with perspectives, I like messing with the ideas, and I
Yes.
think that's important to like break out of the your kind of it's your paradigm, right? You're stuck in this paradigm,
Hmm.
and you need to get rid of the Marvel movie paradigm and realize that like it's not a television show, you know, like things happened,
Yes.
and the people that wrote down the history were not always telling the truth, you know, and you could see that very much so in the history of these Eastern European countries when the Soviets rewrote the entire history of World War II from their perspective after the war. And listen, people always go, why don't Eastern Europeans really like Americans that much? Sometimes they feel really ungrateful. This is like as a Eastern European, sometimes I get irritated with a lot of boomers because they say, well, you're ungrateful. America saved us. I'm like, no, you fucking didn't. Maybe the British, right? You fuckers sold us to the Soviets,
Right.
right? You know what I mean? Right? You don't save anybody. Like,
Yeah.
have an American tell East German that he was saved.
I was going to say, if you were east of Berlin or
Yeah,
in eastern Berlin, you were
right.
up a creek.
Right. You
Yep.
know what I mean? And there's this whole idea that, like, no, 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 these guys, you know, like Winston Churchill and those guys, they sold out Eastern Europe, you know, and they absolutely did to the Soviets, right? Um, they sold out their own allies sometimes, the people that were like actually partisans against the Nazis, like in Albania and those
Right.
places. So, and this is documented fact. I mean, look, and then the US sold out the British in the South Pacific. If you want to read interesting stuff, read about, Borneo and Burma and all these places where the US basically sold out
The
British colonial elements and French colonial elements to communist rebels, right? Because they wanted the British out of Southeast Asia, right? Um,
Mhm.
it was the Americans that really organized the handover of Hong Kong back to China. But
Well, and it's how do I do this diplomatically? But that was, if I remember correctly, Ian Murray and Rhodesia. The whole idea to the end of his days was it wasn't it, Rhodesia didn't fall, and it wasn't even Africans or communists or anything. It was the West that
right,
allowed Rhodesia to fall.
right,
They stabbed
absolutely.
us in the back.
I mean, the same thing with South Africa, right?
Right.
I mean,
Mm-hmm.
right, and it's ultimately like that's why that's why I always find like right wing racism really like corny, if that makes sense, really stupid, because you'll have like some right wingers that are like very like racist towards like blacks or whatever, right? And I'm like, but why? Your enemies aren't those guys. Your enemies are the white liberals.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They're the ones that are passing the laws. They're the ones that are doing everything you don't like. Like that's why you can how can it be a white versus black thing in America? Because everything I hate about America is a white liberal thing.
Sure.
You know what I mean, right? Like
Yeah. Well, it is.
I'm being facetious here, right? But like I have to explain that. It's like, really?
It's the question of, do you address the symptom or do you address the cause?
Right, exactly. Like I'm not
Yeah.
mad at fucking Trayvon outside of 7-Eleven, all right? I'm mad at, and this is, very similar to what Cordreanu said about the worker strikes. Don't be mad at the workers who have legitimate grievances. Be mad at the people that organized them for the wrong strike, you know?
Mhm.
And that was actually kind of his ideology, which was like, those are the people in
Sure.
charge that you have to go after. But yeah, I think that's what it is. I think you can
Okay.
just bring an intellectual kind of level, like try to learn as much as possible. Like, I mean, if anybody sees this podcast, they're gonna be like, look at these fucking fascists. And no, no, I'm not a fascist. I don't care about
Right.
any of this. This is fun, like, go ahead.
Well,
Like, we can't win. Like, it's never gonna happen. Come on, let's be serious here, right? Like, what am I fascist of? Like, who's gonna the American Legionary movement? Just get the fuck out of here. You know what I mean?
well, I
Like,
would
it's like,
say, everybody, it how you can hold in your mind what went on January 6th and the reprisals and the fact that, oh yeah, fascism in the U.S. Come on
right,
now,
right.
come on.
It's kind of like, dude, like I live in the deep South, and half my street doesn't speak English. Like, I'm sorry, guys, but and I'm a foreigner myself, so it's like,
Yeah.
have you ever been in the military? Half of it is not American, so I don't know if you know. I always love. I always love these like super racist boomer types. They're like, "Well, the U.S. military is going to come in, them good old boys." I'm like, "Have you seen Camp Pendleton lately, bro? I don't know if you've seen it, but there ain't not many Brads and Steves there. There's a lot of Jose's and Fernando and that kind of stuff and Jaime's.
Yes.
So I don't know if there's a reality check that these people have, but it's just it's funny to me, and we're entering a new era. Like, God, we're
We
like,
are. I another stream, right? But no, I tend to think we're going to. I prognosticate super states
right.
as as people travel to be around the people they want to be around. And yeah, I think ultimately there is going to be a group of territories and so on, because, like you said, we're as much as we want to overlay the past, we are also in a new era to some degree.
Well, ultimately, as a Christian, I think that the real enemy is the devil, right? And it's out. Well, you know, we won. Like, Christ wins. He's victorious already. It's like we're just kind of mopping up right now, but
Mhm.
it's a chaotic mop up, and I don't know how it's going to end up for me. But I know, at least I know my destination. I hope I do.
Ultimately, yeah,
Ultimately, I'm aiming for a good one, and I realize that, like, I will never, in a way, like, whether it's the Nazis or the communists or the Iron Guard or Mao Zedong or any of the ideologies, they're ultimately all idols, and they're ultimately
yeah,
all rebuilding the Tower of Babel. That's what they're trying to do. And they're all destined to fail, because all these empires are going to fail, because they're all part of where, like, we should be living in the kingdom of God, not our political
right.
ideologies, and they're all going to lead to us just killing each other. And I think what we need to do is realize that, and work on preparing ourselves for to reject these, like, obsessive ideologies, because they all end up in a pogroms, whether it's mass graves caused by communists, or mass graves caused by fascists, or mass graves caused by Buddhists, or whatever, Hindus or something. It all ends in suffering and pain and just insanity. And I think we should reject all that kind of stuff. And we really need to reject the really anti-humanist kind of element that we're seeing in the world today. That's more dangerous than any stupid liberal thing. Is this transhumanist, like, we need less people on this planet, and we need to
Yeah,
transcend and become computer nerds and that kind of stuff. And that's the real evil shit. That's the real, like, fucked up, demonic stuff, right? Because if you become a computer, you have no problem just mass graving everybody. Like,
sure.
the type of stuff that transhumanism logically leads to makes
Yes,
the worst crimes of Hitler, Mao Zedong, Pol Pot look like, just days in the park.
yes.
Because when you can transcend humanity, you transcend everything good. And it's
You
just
you've disconnected
right.
yourself from being made in the image of God.
Right, exactly, right. And it's truly what the Tower of Babel story in the Bible is about, or any of this stuff. And without going to, like, I'm a crazy serious, but you see this stuff with all this alien shit, and movies and stuff. So it's like, in a way, like, sometimes, like, I get irritated when people talk about like Nazis and all this stuff, because it's like it's almost a distraction from what we really need to be talking about, which is that
Sure.
these guys are trying to make fake meat and put computer chips in my skull. That's more important to me than like
Yeah.
Nazis 100 years ago. Like, look, we're it's 2026, right? We're talking about events that happened 100 years ago now,
Yes.
right? There isn't any Nazis, guys. Like, they're gone. Like, there's no communists, guys. The Berlin Wall fell, what, 26, 27 years ago now. No, I'm not 27, 47 years ago,
Right.
right? It's insane,
Perfect.
right? Like, what are we talking about this shit still? Except for our own interest in history, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's not real. What is real is like Elon Musk trying to put a goddamn chip in my skull or something stupid like that, or all the other crazy conspiracy stuff, right? No, but what's really real is that an 8-year-old can access pornography on their computer,
Yes.
right? And that's more important than any of this stuff in a way, right? It's interesting that like it's important that like we have, you know, then your regular American can't afford to buy a house anymore, and that your
Hmm.
20-year-old, can't. And you see it all over Twitter. That's actually what made me pissed off and made me want to delete Twitter. X, right? Is that like young guys aren't driving anymore because why? What is there to drive to? And you see that
Yes.
thing pissed me off so
Yeah.
much. I
Yeah.
deleted
That- yeah.
Right, but it's true, and I have a lot of young friends, and it's like,
Yeah.
I bought a car for like $400, and my insurance was like $50 back when I was driving, and now it's
Yes.
like your cheapest car is $10,000, and like your insurance is like $600, and you can't afford that, right? And then if you do, where do you go? Like, I can't go. Like, I used to go and like go to a coffee shop in California and smoke cigarettes for 10 hours. That's what I used to do in high school. Now you can't. First of all, you have to be 21 to buy cigarettes. Land of the free, guys, right? And you're not allowed to smoke them anywhere, and there's no parties allowed, and you can't do anything because you get shot by the cops, or boomers call the cops to shoot you. So what is there to do? Oh, let's go to a mall. There's no malls, and
Mhm.
there's just nothing to do. That's more important to me than any of the stupid Nazi shit or any of this stuff. It's
Sure.
like what are we doing as people on the right or whatever to make life better for the younger people? That's what, like, whoever tells me that, that's who I'm following. Like, what are you doing? What are you doing? Like, how are you doing? Like, how about the college graduates? Like, they can't find jobs. What are you doing to get these guys jobs? Right? Um,
Yeah.
you know, that's the kind of stuff that matters, and like everything else is just entertainment. Like, it's entertainment. Like, going, like right wing guys and left wing guys doing this whole like blood sport thing where they're like
Yeah.
insulting each other and debating. It's just stupid. It doesn't put gas in my car. It doesn't put car in my car. Right? It doesn't. It's like, it's the reality of it, right? But more
Perfect.
people want, so I think that's
Yeah.
what's important. I think that's why these
Okay.
conversations matter, because we need to have these, like, what
Yeah.
can we do? And on our podcast, one thing we talk, my co-host is a teacher. He's a high school teacher, right? And he talks
Hmm.
a lot about like mentoring young children and stuff. Not children,
Yes.
high schoolers, teenagers becoming adults. And it's kind of dire. It's dire. He's from a small area, a small town, and it's kind of dire looking for these guys, and there's not a lot of answers. Like, what do you do? Get in debt and go to college in debt or whatever, or join the military so you can
Yeah.
maybe not have as much debt. And there's so much stuff that we just don't have answers for. And then you turn on the news or you turn on the internet for debates, and we're talking about like reflecting pools and stupid shit like that has nothing to do with it, right?
Perfect. Well, speaking of that podcast, do some shilling. Where can people find you? I know you are now on a Substack.
So
You've
we're
got the
everywhere.
podcast.
Everywhere you can find podcasts. It's called the Black Ibis Social Club, right? And
Okay.
it's not a political podcast. We talk about whatever you want every week on Thursdays at 7 p.m. Eastern time. We have guests on. It's just two guys. The idea is that it's like a lounge. It's like a digital lounge. You come in and you talk, and for example, our last episode, I had my friend Lisa Kuznak. She's a science fiction author, and we talked about my favorite and her favorite movie, Total Recall, the one with Arnold from the 90s, and we just talked about that movie for 3 hours, and
Good.
we had a bunch of guys, like, I don't know if you're familiar with John Carter. He's on Twitter a lot.
Yeah. On
Yeah,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
he's a
Canadian.
friend,
Yeah.
Canadian. Yeah, he's a friend of the podcast. He's come on a bunch of times, and a lot of the guys from like the Twitter era, come on the podcast.
Okay.
We just talk politics, religion, or sometimes we just talk about like, we talked about Starship Troopers for like a few hours one time, and
Yeah.
just weird stuff. I don't want to put it in a box,
Okay.
so we'll go on to this conversation, and then like we'll talk about boomers, and sometimes I'll, like, we talked about the great things that I love about America during 4th of July. That was a good episode, I think. We talked about the whole diner goth thing a few weeks ago. You know what I'm talking about, right?
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
My love of goth music, from the 80s, like Morrissey and stuff.
Okay.
And just whatever, man. We talk about everything. So the idea is that it recreates the coffee shops I used to hang out when I was it's a salon, if you want to be
Yeah. Right.
centric, but you can find it. Just Google Black Ibis Social Club, like the bird, the ibis.
Okay.
It's hosted on Substack, but it's also on like Apple, on Spotify, it's on YouTube too. YouTube, I don't know. Never get a lot of good traction from YouTube. I think YouTube hates me. I think they shadow ban me. I probably said naughty word or something,
Right.
But the other ones I seem to do well on, like Spotify and stuff. So we'll see. But yeah, and you can find
Okay.
my writing on Substack, also under Black Ibis Social Club. It's not as political. It's not as interesting. It's more like I'm more into literature specifically.
Yes.
And art. I went to college for art, and that's what I did. So that's kind of interesting. But I mean, art's interesting when it comes to fascism. I mean, there's plenty of right-wing art guys,
There's a ton.
Yeah, there's a
There's a
ton
ton, and I
actually.
do. I think. Oh, I don't want to go. Okay.
We're going to go into
Try and do
another.
this in 10 seconds. Yeah, the idea of limitations and order, I think, plays into all that.
Right. There
Okay,
absolutely is, right? I mean,
yeah.
what's interesting, the most disordered, at least visually, which would be what's his name, the Spanish guy. He was a Francoist, and he loved Hitler.
Not
Salvador
Dolly. Was it Dolly?
no, Dali. It was Dali. Yeah, he was a
Okay.
quite the fan of Hitler and a hardcore Catholic Francoist, and he
Yes.
got kicked out of the French art establishment. But everybody loves Dolly, right? But he was quite the fascist. A lot of those guys were, and a lot of writers and stuff too. Art wise, midway in your chat, he asked. I actually studied fine art, painting specifically, right? And then I realized I kind of suck at it, so I kind of moved on for it. I mean, I was like one of those things that, like when you do something and you're like, oh, I'm pretty good, and then you're like,
Yes,
no, I'm
right.
really not. I'm really
When
not.
you're a big fish in a small pond.
Yeah, and then all of a sudden I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm really not. So I'm just. But I love art history, and I love that. And
Yes.
I guess I'm like slightly talented. I was slightly talented. Now I'm just like
Okay.
old. But I thought about working in like video games early on, and I did that for a little
Yes.
bit, and I hated it. I hated it. I
Okay.
hated that industry. It was a disaster. Like just a bunch of
Yes.
weirdos. This is Southern California, and I worked for briefly for a big video game company, and I hated it so much. I quit and I joined the military. That's how much I hated it. I was like,
There you go.
and I
Oh
was like,
man,
yeah.
there is so much I want to follow up with, but I want to respect your time.
I know. If it wasn't Thursday, I would be up until 2 a.m. But what? I'll invite you to come on our podcast, and we can do this on another day too.
Okay, that would be fine. So guys, go and look up the Black Ibis. You'll find the podcast. You'll find them on Substack. And Alexandru, this was great. I appreciate it.
Wonderful, man. Yeah. Good night, guys. Hope you enjoy the rant, because it was fun.
All right. Have a good evening.
Maybe.